Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connotaire de Saint-Laurent. Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Bélard.
Présent.
Monsieur le connotaire de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connotaire de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connotaire de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Ouen. Monsieur le connotaire de Sainte-Marie. Monsieur le connotaire de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Luce. Madame le deputy Dublé. Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Lehegara. Monsieur le deputy Ayer. Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Al.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Mesic. Monsieur le deputy Joseph. Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles. Madame le deputy Forey.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Scott. Monsieur le deputy Reniff. Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Ward.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Wilson. Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être du jugement du peuple, qu'il t'a plu de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Madame la connotaire de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connotaire de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Dublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph. Vous jurez que Monsieur le deputy Joseph est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Madame le deputy Scott.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Les États sont constitués. So we resume the debate and second reading on the articles as amended for the assisted dying Jersey law. I had indicated yesterday that Deputy Gorse wished to speak. Deputy Gorse, you wish to speak?
Thank you, sir. I'm taking the view that because the articles are taken en bloc, therefore it's the entire bit of legislation where normally one might make a speech in third reading. Second reading is in this instance because they're altogether not dissimilar because the articles hang together. We are, by my calculation, and I may have misremembered, my memory is not perfect, we've already had 4 votes on assisted dying, and each of those previous 4 votes, the original principle, the basis of which path we should follow, and the law drafting memorandum in effect, and then we've had the first reading of this legislation, all being approved by a substantial majority of the Assembly. Of course, I've been on the other side of those votes, so those members are not surprised for me to comment on. So I think we come into the getting towards the business end of the second reading and ultimately the third reading, knowing that by substantial majority, the Assembly supports the introduction of assisted dying legislation into Jersey. And I just wanted to make some comments about how the legislation hangs together. To my mind, there is absolutely no doubt other than this is a complex and a nuanced debate and decision. And I say that, sir, because right now islanders have different experiences of the end-of-life care. Maybe in earlier speeches I was a little bit too despondent about some of that care, but there is no doubt that right now some islanders have an appropriate, pain-free end of life that they're able to spend with their families, and their end of life experience is as good as I think all members would like to see for all islanders. That end of life experience, of course, is perhaps enhanced in some cases by DNR. That's the withdrawal of medical treatment rather than the administration of drugs to end life, which is what we're talking about here. And that process is by and large undertaken by or with the will of the individual, whether that's simply withdrawal of treatment or desire to have increased pain relief. It's undertaken with the will of the individual, and autonomy has been an important part of this debate and why some members will be supporting this legislation. It's supported by clinicians and family. And of course it's been evolving over the years as citizens have lived longer, as medical interventions and treatment have improved. The corollary of that is that people can be experiencing at the end of their life difficulties, and therefore we've needed to introduce that sort of process. And what assisted dying, there is an argument that says that assisted dying legislation creates a legal framework to put around those situations. And I can understand that argument, the certainty that might be proposed, which this legislation throughout its articles does propose. It's all about creating that legal framework. For my part, I suppose I've come to this debate and this bit of legislation believing that the current framework is sufficient and that we don't need to take that step away from what I think works well, although I understand that for some clinicians in a world of litigation, they feel more uncomfortable with putting the patient's needs and the family's needs at the forefront at the end of life in how they administer pain-relieving drugs. For my part, that is sufficient, and this legislative framework that we see throughout these articles is unnecessary. But I do accept that there is a different argument, and that argument is that this law is required to create a legal framework to give certainty to individuals, to give certainty to clinicians. And that, to me, is also quite a sad reflection upon where we are as a society and how we believe that government and legislation can solve complex, nuanced problems. But it is where we are. So I, as other members have said, come from a Judeo-Christian background. That background and basis is the basis of Western community and society. It of course welcomes contradiction, it welcomes argument, it welcomes democratic debate, and that's exactly what we've been doing over the last three days. But it has that belief in the sanctity of life in all stages, and that life is precious. And I know we've got other legislation that we're going to have to deal with before this parliamentary term expires, which will also raise these issues of sanctity of life. When does life start? In that case, this is when should life end, and how should it end? It has that in common with all Abrahamic religions, of course, not just the Judeo-Christian tradition. And therefore, I take the view that in making the final decision on this legislation, I understand the arguments about dealing with pain at the end of life. I think the current process can deal with that. Others may disagree. I also understand the arguments about autonomy, which we heard a very powerful speech from Deputy Miles yesterday about autonomy. And that is, of course, incredibly important. But I always view autonomy, sir, from the perspective of my autonomy, of course, is important, but it's got to be tempered by whether my autonomy may have an effect upon somebody else, which is detrimental. And I think really the Attorney General designate intimated that in his assessment around the human rights compliance of all of this legislation brought together. And the reason I say that is because whilst there are strong safeguards in this legislation, and I agree that the Minister and the officials have done their best to provide the safeguards that they can, I come back to the point that we are talking about a life and death issue. And I worry very much that it sends a very subtle, and it's an unintended message, that one life is more important than another, and one experience of life is more important than another, and that vulnerable members of our community will, if we are not very careful, feel either pressured or undermined or coerced. And I understand that the argument can be run that the legislation is currently drafted. It's difficult to see that happening. But we already know that a member of the Assembly has lodged a proposition to extend the existing legislation. So even though we've had a vote on the scope of the existing legislation, and I know that our lobby friends in the gallery, they themselves have said that this approach to assisted dying will be the most permissive currently, either passing through Parliament or awaiting Privy Council. And so we must bear that in mind as well. And so for me, even though I recognise entirely where the vote will go, it is not for me the right decision, and I will not be supporting this legislation as it goes through second reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The next member who's indicated wish to speak is Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And I decided to speak at the second reading because we just gone through all articles and had deep and long and very important debates. As Deputy Ghost rightly said, it's probably one of the most, and I feel it's one of the most emotive and complex subjects we can debate as states members. Preparing speech today, this morning, I looked at 4 previous debates back in 2021. I looked at my first speech and I remember saying that it's literally a life or death debate, as I said at my first speech almost 5 years ago. And from the beginning of this process, I have received many thoughtful, well-reasoned emails and letters from islanders, professionals, campaigners on both sides. I remain grateful for all those contributions, even whether I have not agreed, because all these contributions over these 5 years really deeply reflected how this matters touches our community, where we equally, and we as a states members, we were equally proactive and also we were equally reactive in seeking the best way forward for Jersey. As Deputy Morrell and Deputy Miles mentioned in their speeches, I still remember when it began with the Citizens Assisted Dying Jury, where the report, for me, that report gave us an insight into what a group of ordinary islanders, having heard evidence, believe is islands should consider. And that mattered for me. It grounded this debate not just in politics, but importantly in public reflection. Personally, I have gone, like Deputy Morrell, through, actually I had 3 elections because I had by-election, and I came into this office with clear belief that governments should be cautious about interfering in people's private lives, and that its person with sound mind has autonomy over their own body. And this is fundamental human rights. It was my personal belief when I came in. The freedom to live your own way must, in carefully defined circumstances, include the freedom to die your own way. Saying this over these 5 years, and especially over the last 2 days, I have involved. Even yesterday, I changed my position on 2 amendments that how I expected to vote, and listen carefully to colleagues. I listened to Deputy Baloch and Deputy Barbara Wood, and Deputy Rob Ward, and Deputy Duble, and Deputy Jonathan Ranoff. I was sitting there and making decisions, listening to the debate. And I think this is what the Assembly debate is for. It shows that we can truly listen, weigh the evidence, reflect, and then make decisions where our values come through, informed not only by our experiences and beliefs, but what we have heard in this chamber. For me, that is values-led leadership. It's the leadership grounded in integrity. It's about holding firm to your core principles, if it's dignity, autonomy, and compassion, while allowing evidence, respectful arguments, and thoughtful challenge to shape how those principles applied. Each member of this assembly is elected by their constituents. Each of us carries our own conviction and conscience into this chamber. And over the past days, and I reflected this morning about it, over the past days, we have seen members speak not from instructions or alignment, but from deeply held belief informed by evidence and experience. And this is what reflects the strengths of this assembly. This has been personal debate. Members spoke from the faith, from humanist belief, lived experience, from professional insights. I needed to confront my Jewish identity and Jewish beliefs and my personal beliefs, and I had a conversation with my community. And even where I think, where I disagreed, I never ever doubt the sincerity and the care behind everyone's contribution. As Conatable Sanseria said, there is one amendment that hasn't been accepted, changed his mind. Well, I was really sad about one of the amendments, the scrutiny amendment that gives physical, personal ability more preference wasn't accepted, and I considered would it change my mind, and I decided it will not change my personal mind. Again, I will say I'm proud of how this assembly has conducted itself. I'm proud that we created space for differences without hostility. Proud that members could speak from the heart. Proud of the scrutiny panel. My thanks to the chair of the scrutiny panel and the Deputy Curtis and Deputy Balash, who were members of the panel, and to the officers. And also my thank you to the minister. I think it was an amazing piece of work. We demonstrated maturity and respect. Where I started this process 5 years ago and where I finish are not identical, but they're consistent in principle. I changed my mind on some things and I was able to vote freely. So autonomy matters. This legislation, and it's right, the death is always complex. It's not easy. And this legislation will not simplify the complexity that families will go through. But it recognizes that in defined circumstances, compassion and respect to autonomy can coexist. So for me, within these strict safeguards that we debated through the articles and limited specifically to terminal illness, for me, it's the right step for Jersey, and I will be voting in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The next member to speak on the articles as amended is Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I'm sort of pleased to follow a couple of those speeches. I just want to take this on a personal journey, really. So I've remained silent throughout this debate because the more I've reflected on this issue, the more I strip it down. At my very core, I simply do not believe in the concept of the state enabling an individual to take their own life. I was reflecting with the Dean on this matter, and he told me about a sermon he'd given on the famous story of Jacob wrestling with God. This feels a bit like that for me. Frederick Buechner characterized Jacob's divine encounter at the Jabbok River as the magnificent defeat of the human soul at the hands of God. It's in Jacob's story that we can easily recognize our own elements of struggle, fear, darkness, loneliness, vulnerability, emptiness, exhaustion, and pain. That really struck a chord. But what has caused me to stand and speak this morning was another coffee room encounter. This time, it was a conversation with the constable or constable of St. Lawrence. We were talking about some of the more unusual tasks of a constable, and she described having to deal with a pauper's burial. It's the true essence of leaving no one behind. The sanctity in which we hold human life, a principle that sits at the heart of Christian belief. From the very beginning of Christian teaching, life is understood not simply as a biological fact, but as a sacred gift from God. the Bible's opening chapters describe humanity as being made in the image and likeness of God. That's a deeply profound statement about human worth, dignity, and purpose. For Christians, this isn't a symbolic language, it is the foundation of why every human life is considered precious, irreplaceable, and endowed with inherent value. Christian belief of the human life is not ours to own, manipulate, or dispose of. It comes from God, and therefore it ultimately belongs to God. This belief leads Christians to view every stage of life, from its beginning to its natural end, with reverence and humility. It is why Christians have historically been at the forefront of caring for the sick, comforting the dying, protecting the vulnerable, and offering compassion to those in despair. The duty is not only to preserve life, but to honor its dignity. Central to Christian teaching is the idea that God is present with us in suffering. And that suffering, while painful, does not strip a person of their worth. The Christian response to suffering has always been rooted in accompaniment, being present, offering care, relieving pain, and surrounding the person with love. Jesus himself modeled this by tending to the sick, comforting the brokenhearted, and showing mercy to those its society has overlooked. For Christians, compassion is not expressed by ending life, but by standing with someone through their darkest moments. The sanctity of life also carries a responsibility to protect those who may not be able to protect themselves. Throughout history, Christian communities have emphasized the duty to care for the elderly, the disabled, the isolated, and the voiceless. The Christian tradition warns that when society permits intentional life-ending actions, even with the best of intentions, those who are most vulnerable risk becoming the most at risk. A life that is frail or dependent is no less sacred and no less worthy of protection and love. But at its heart, the Christian view is not merely about rules or prohibitions, it's about affirming the deep, immeasurable value of every person. It is about recognizing that no human life is without meaning, and that no suffering person should ever feel they are a burden, or that their life is no longer worth living, or that ending their life is a solution we offer them. Christian teaching calls us to respond to suffering with compassion, but a compassion rooted in presence, care, solidarity, and love. True compassion seeks to relieve pain, not eliminate the person who feels it. Today, as we consider the complex questions about life, death, suffering, and autonomy, the Christian voice simply invites us to pause and remember this: life is sacred because every person is sacred. And a society that protects life, especially the lives of those who are weakest, is a society that affirms its own humanity. I am, though, reminded that for some this day will be seen as a blessing. So I thought it fitting to end with a poem recently shared with me, and I hope it brings comfort to them. It's by Rosemary Wahola Trommer. Even now I am becoming wind, something less flesh, more movement, more current, less here, more everywhere. Through the moment, I think I know this truth. The knowing resolids me, makes me into clay that pretends it is wind. But becoming clay again, I am destined to crumble, disintegrate until I am dust and once again one with the wind. How to trust anything then, except this infinite becoming and re-becoming, and whatever it is that is alive inside it all, that I put my faith in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the articles as amended? Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate people feel very strongly and believe that we are doing the right thing today. But there are still members in the Assembly with concerns about this legislation and the way in which it has been presented and drafted. There are members with different opinions, but who nonetheless accept the will of the people, even though they carry these personal doubts. But like the majority of members in the States, I'm not in the business of denying a person with capacity the right to make their own decision. Arguments of self-determination and autonomy being central to that. But the rights and needs of other people do need to be considered at the same time. People who are vulnerable, people who are open to coercion, and people who may have had the capacity once, but no longer have capacity. And for these people, the legislation as it is drafted, even after scrutiny, which has provided quite a lot of detail for us to consider, I don't believe that it contains the necessary safeguards that the state has a duty to fulfil to all islanders. These are the people that will fall victim to this legislation. I'm sure it gives many people a good feeling that at least we've got something done, and no doubt have been greatly congratulated by the lobby groups advocating for assisted dying, which have been so heavily representative throughout, as well as during the debate. It's not just a question of getting something done, though. How can it be fit for purpose when the safeguards we've identified in this legislation continue to cast doubt, continue to put vulnerable people at risk? What have we done about that? There is a sense that members are determined, perhaps some even enthusiastic, to get this legislation in its current form passed. And I think we would have had better legislation if more consideration had been given to those with serious concerns as to how these things are going to work. Some even asking how we've arrived at a place where someone who is conscious but has no capacity to change their mind in their final moments about a decision they took when they did have capacity can be euthanized by the state. There are consequences of euthanizing someone, and for me the safeguards are not strong enough on this issue. Would anyone here wish to see their relative euthanized because they have lost their capacity? That is the quality of the legislation before us, and I think people in the island would be shocked to hear that the legislation will allow this. The legislation as it's drafted will lead to examples which we are foreseeing now, but we're ignoring this because we want to say we've got it done, and it will lead to problems down the line. So I'm asking, sir, for that perspective to be considered, not just because it's my own personal view, but I also feel that it reflects a lot of the concerns that islanders themselves have expressed. And as a basis for that, I cannot support it in its current form.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any member wish to speak on Deputy Chadier?
Sir, we are still in the second reading, and I wanted to take some time to at least reflect on all the work that has gone into these various articles. I think over a number of years, there has been an iterative process that's been followed, both starting off from points of principle and then giving very deep consideration to where the right balance of autonomy and safeguards should be. The various ministers, but especially this current health minister, has made sure that there have been lots of occasions for engagement. We know that, of course, in the past there was the citizens' jury, which Deputy Miles spoke of, and there's been no shortage of opportunity for engagement for states members in this whole process, and I availed myself of some of those sessions which were put on quite early on, and I found it a very useful process. I didn't need to go to everyone, but I was certainly kept up to date with the changes. And I remember having quite a frank discussion and an open discussion in one of those sessions about the waiver, in fact. And I think that was at a point when the waiver wasn't being considered. And people put their points of view forward saying, actually, you know, should we not have a waiver if someone was in this situation and they fell into a state of unconsciousness or inability to make decisions, should they not have their rights respected? And I think for me, I'm glad that what we've got in front of us, notwithstanding that we've had some robust and I think generally very polite debates in here, I think we've shown that we can cover ourselves in if not in glory, but certainly do very well when it comes to these kind of debates, sir. So that there has been some immoderate language, and if I think back over the debate, there's been talk of people administering poison. There's been comparisons to mass murderers, so comparing our current medical profession in Jersey to individuals who have been found guilty of being serial killers. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't say that members don't have the right to offend in this assembly. I think we do have to acknowledge that members have to hear things that they don't always like. But of course, it's incumbent on any member of this assembly, I think, to decide what's considered helpful speech. And I have great respect for the last speaker, the previous health minister, who's a valuable panel member to me. But I think it is alarmist when we start using terms like state-sanctioned euthanasia, because this is absolutely not what is being passed here. First of all, it wouldn't be legal. I don't think any of the legal advice given to ministers would allow for state-sanctioned murder to appear on our books. I don't think that would somehow get through the Privy Council. But more fundamentally, it's not true. I don't think it's ethically true. That's what we're proposing, but it could be argued, of course, if one is a hardliner. But actually, what we've been talking about throughout these debates and these amendments is the balance between choice and autonomy and safeguarding for everyone. So it's about not forcing any medical practitioner to do something that they don't want to do. It is recognising the fact that there will be people who have the same passionate views of Deputy Gorst that Deputy War made, but in a different way, which doesn't involve an old deity. It doesn't involve a figure from an Abrahamic religion. It may be that they follow a completely different religion. It may be an Eastern religion, it may be more mystical, it may be philosophical, it may be that actually they don't rely on that at all. And, you know, I'm very much aware in my leisure time to make sure that I listen to history podcasts or read books, and recently I've been listening to and reading about the Enlightenment in Europe. And of course, it came in different phases. In France, the Enlightenment pretty much came in the 18th century, sir, in Europe, more widely in Italy, perhaps where it started off. It was a little bit earlier in the century before. And it wasn't that there was a wholesale rejection of religion or Christianity. It was actually the fact that there was an ascendancy of the faith in the human. And so actually there was a rebalancing of autonomy. And of course, this did coincide with the fact that, you know, when there was the invention of the printing press, when people could start to read and learn for themselves, and of course the Reformation had a big impact on that, people started to not just take things that they were told for granted and started to think for themselves. And I think it's great that in Jersey, we're perhaps experiencing our own enlightenment now in the 21st century. Better late than never is what I say, sir. And that is not to make light of this, sir, but this kind of decision probably wouldn't have been possible in Jersey, I would say, even 5 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago. And I think it is a great credit to both this assembly, the work of the minister, but also an acknowledgement that our community, our society has moved on. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It is actually recognising that sanctity of life can be interpreted in many different ways, and that has to be the respect for the person, respect for the individual. And as many states members have perhaps said in the past in other debates of not an entirely similar nature, but which do have an intersection when it comes to human rights and the choice, is that this isn't compulsory. Nobody has to do this, and I think that there are sufficient safeguards in this. And I would also perhaps, my last point for this really is to say that it's one thing to say that the human rights law, whether it's the UN Declaration of Human Rights or the ECHR, didn't envisage assisted dying when it was implemented. But of course, human rights are constructed in such a way that they're always evolving and that they are capable of dealing with new concepts and new developments as society itself evolves. So there's absolutely nothing contradictory with human rights in all of this. In fact, it's just an extension of the possibility for governments and assemblies to consider these human rights applications in the round, sir. My final thoughts on this will be that, as Deputy Morell, I think, said yesterday, he said it's really important to have, to show that this assembly can make changes. He said that there's often a criticism from outside that changes don't happen, sir. I don't know if that's universal, because I think actually, if you take to social media, you do get a very mixed response, sir, and that people can be equally critical of changes as they are of states members not changing anything. So it really depends which side of the fence one sits on. But the message I took from that is that when you have conviction politicians of whatever persuasion that come into this assembly with a vision and a desire to get things done, and that they do that, sir, I think the public and perhaps members of this assembly also have respect for those people, sir. And I think today, although it will be not a decision that everyone in the assembly can fully support, and I respect that, I think it will be a day where Jersey and our systems should be proud of themselves, and I think we need to give that acknowledgement to the staff that have been working on this over a number of years. The work isn't finished yet, and to thank them for the work that they've done on this, as well as the various lobby groups, both locally, nationally and internationally, who have been battling for this issue, often against some very difficult odds, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Tadier. Chief Minister, you had your light on.
As we approach the close of this debate, it's clear that the Assembly has given this issue very careful and serious consideration. Assisted dying is not ordinary legislation. It raises difficult questions about autonomy, protection, compassion, caution, dignity, responsibility. Throughout this debate, members have spoken respectfully and with clear understanding of the significance of the decision before us. We have heard moving accounts of suffering at the end of life and the desire of some islanders for greater choice and control. We have also heard equally important concerns about safeguarding vulnerable people, the responsibilities placed on clinicians, and the wider implications of changing the law in this area. Both perspectives are legitimate, and both deserve and have deserved the weight we have given. Over the course of scrutiny and debate, the legislation has evolved. Safeguards have been examined in detail. The role of the Assisted Dying Review Panel, and I commend them for their work, has been clarified. And issues relating to capacity, eligibility, oversight and appeal, including third-party challenge, have been carefully tested by this Assembly. So we must now balance two important principles. First, respect for individual autonomy. That a competent adult who is terminally ill and experiencing intolerable suffering may wish, under strict safeguards, to exercise that choice at the end of their life. Second, the protection of the vulnerable, that any legal framework must ensure decisions are freely made, properly assessed, and subject to rigorous oversight. Members acting in good faith may reach different conclusions. That is inherent in and with conscious legislation such as this. What this debate has demonstrated, however, is that the Assembly has approached the matter thoughtfully, respectfully, and with a genuine care for islanders. If the Assembly decides to proceed and approve the law in the second reading, implementation will require continued vigilance, careful regulation, and ongoing review. Passing the law would not be the end of the Assembly's responsibilities, but the beginning of it. I would like to commend members for the respectful tone of this debate and to acknowledge the contribution of clinicians, advocacy groups, faith communities, disability representatives and members of the public, sir, on all sides of the debate who have helped to inform our deliberations, sir. I will be supporting the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Constable St John.
Thank you, sir. Sir, like Deputy Gorst, Deputy Waugh and others, I'm also proud to say that I come from a Christian background. Listening to Deputy Waugh this morning, I was reminded of the story of the Good Samaritan, a story where the priest walked past and it was the neighbour who helped. So we can interpret the Good Samaritan story in more than one way. My interpretation as a Christian is probably different to some others, but I know that many Christians do think the same as I do. Alleviating suffering, I would argue, sir, that the Samaritans' core trait was mercy and action. They believed that providing a suffering, terminally ill person with the means to end their life is the ultimate act of kindness and empathy. And loving thy neighbour, I prefer to interpret the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to mean that if a person would want their own unbearable suffering ended, they should grant that same right to their neighbour. So earlier in the debate, we heard from Deputy Morell about the different circumstances that people find themselves in. He spoke about being sat in the doctor's waiting room, not knowing why other people are there, what they may be suffering from, and how he, like most, don't share why he is attending. So in one of the amendments, I spoke about respecting others' views. In recent weeks and months, sir, I've experienced two very different circumstances of people who are both receiving palliative care. So the first is a gentleman, a quiet, private man, who really didn't want to trouble anyone. He remained at home for as long as possible, probably too long, and has now made the inevitable journey to see out the last days of his life in the wonderful care of hospice. So having offered to assist the family, I received a message at 6 o'clock on Christmas Day. The wife, I would say, had reluctantly messaged me asking for help. I rushed around to assist. He was very calm and apologetic. I asked why they'd waited 3 hours before calling me, and they said they didn't want to interrupt my lunch. A few weeks later, sir, I had another message again asking for help. This time it was in the middle of Storm Goretti, and again they had contacted me as a last resort because they needed help. So I always think, what if it was my wife who needed that help? Would I want someone to go and help her? Of course I would. It wasn't far for me to travel, and as Minister for Infrastructure, I was more than aware of the advice not to leave home. I went to assist, and again they were very apologetic, but extremely grateful. So the gentleman in question I know is a man of faith, and although I never asked him, I'd be very surprised if he would ever contemplate assisted dying. The second example, sir, is a gentleman who's incredibly close to me, someone who has battled cancer for the last 6 years and done it with all their might. Sadly, they too are now receiving palliative care, with members of the hospice team giving assistance in their home, and we had not discussed assisted dying before. 2 weeks ago, sir, we went for breakfast. Lunch is still a possibility, but dinner is out of the question as he doesn't have enough energy from mid-afternoon. So the person told me they had attended hospice for an appointment with the doctor the day before to discuss pain management. I asked who he had met, and he said he said who. I knew them and how lucky he was to have met that person and have them looking after them, because they are so good at what they do. I said I'd discussed assisted dying with this health professional in the past, and whilst fully appreciating the excellent work carried out by the team at hospice and others, that our views sadly differed. I'm a firm believer in choice. I looked across the table, sir, anxiously waiting for his response. He looked at me, and after a short pause, "Good," he said. He told me he'd told hospice if the law gets passed, he'd want to sign up for it. You wouldn't believe it, he said. The pain at times and the other side effects is truly unbearable. Sir, sadly, if, or should I say when, this law is passed, it will be too late for this individual and others like him. But he and others will take some comfort to know that others in the future will have an option. So this is just one example of two people at similar stages in the same process. They are very different. Their families are both supporting them, doing what they think is right. So safeguarding, protection of individuals, including health professionals, reviews, etc., are vitally important. Ultimately, sir, it's about people. We've heard more than once that this is likened to state-sanctioned euthanasia. Do those who suggest this prefer the continuation of suffering, and would they describe that as state-sanctioned torture? What is right for one may not be right for the other, so let's give people choice. So I'd like to pay tribute, as others have done, to the Minister and his team for their excellent work. I'd also like to pay tribute to the panel, and especially the Chair, for their extremely thorough review of the proposals. In closing, sir, I would echo the words of the Chair of the panel. We can be proud of this. We can be assured that the work has been thorough from both officers, advisors, and in this Assembly, the politicians. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatar. Does any other member wish to speak on the articles as amended in second reading? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon the Minister to reply.
Sir, this debate on the articles has been necessarily long and at times a little challenging. The Assembly has wrestled very creditably with one of the most important matters that it's ever likely to face. Much has been said about the provisions of the draft law, and I'd like to thank all members for their contribution. So, as with the debate on the principles, on such a subject, I don't feel it's appropriate for me to make mention of any specific comment or any specific speech, save for saying that in adopting this law, we would be establishing one of the safest, most clearly defined and transparent assisted dying systems anywhere in the world. So a system designed not only to enable choice at the end of life, but to protect every person touched by the process, the person seeking an assisted death, their family, professionals, and members of our whole Ireland community. I believe the majority of Irelanders want this law to be passed. They want us, as their elected representatives, to have the courage and conviction to make the decision today to adopt this safe and well-considered law. So there are a good number of people to thank, and I hope members won't mind, but I've saved that for my final comments at the end of the third reading. As stated at the beginning of the debate, it seems sensible for the vote to be taken en bloc, and with that in mind, sir, I'd like to call for the appel.
Sorry, did you call for the appel, Minister? Thank you. The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. All members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. and I can announce that the articles as amended have been adopted. 32 votes pour, 16 votes contre, and no abstentions.
May we have the names, please, sir?
Both ways?
Those members voting for the Conotab of St Peter, St Martin, St John and St Mary, and deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Luce, Doublé, Ayer, Rob Ward, Gardner, Farnham, Mesick, Coles, Ore, Miles, Scott, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Jean Miller, Tom Binet, Ferry, Annex Curtis, Stevenson, Andrews, and the Conotab of Grouville and St Clement and Deputy Alves. Those members voting contre, the Conotab of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, Trinity, St Juan and St Saviour, and Deputies Morel, Lehegara, Gorst, Moore, Balash, War, Hal, Kovac, Barbara Ward and Wilson.
Thank you. So we come to third reading. Do you wish to propose the matter in third reading, Minister?
Yes, sir.
Do you wish to speak in third reading?
No, sir, I'm aware that at least one other member wishes to speak, so I'll reserve my comments for closing.
Very well. Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir, I chose to speak in third reading rather than second reading, but my comments are relatively short. Third reading is an opportunity to say if we think there is any reason why we think the amended law should not be passed, and I am as free from such doubts as I can be. It's been a full and detailed debate, and I hope that when people look back, they will judge that the Assembly did its job well. It feels to me that all points of view have been expressed very fully. I would like to observe that decisions we have made in this debate have essentially followed through on the views expressed by the public through various consultations, exercises, and also carried through on decisions taken by the Assembly in previous votes. That consistency is not necessarily a guarantee that we have got things right, but it does give a feeling of solid foundations to the law that we will hopefully shortly pass. I note that the Minister has played a straight bat throughout these proceedings. He did not seek to reintroduce his own views. He has shown clear thinking and good judgment, and I congratulate him for his shepherding of this legislation through the Assembly. I do not share the view expressed by Deputy Moore that because we have difficulty with our health budget, we should not launch the assisted dying service. The health budget is indeed a problem, and opinions differ on the reasons for the crisis in health funding. However, I do believe we need to think about assisted dying in a different context. Deputy Moore is right to say it is a new service, but to see it only in those terms is, I respectfully submit, to miss the significance of the moment. Because assisted dying is also a major extension of human rights, and it reflects a fundamental shift in society's views about what is humane, and you could also say what it is to be human. It extends personal autonomy. Having said that, I do think the issue of money will not go away. We should all be aware that there are many ways this could play out in the following years. If waiting lists for serious treatments continue to grow, then it may well be that the public start to ask questions about where the money should be spent. But rather than seeing that as a deal breaker, I would say it is likely to spur future health ministers to resolve the issues, just as introducing the assisted dying service has led to a welcome focus on and commitment to palliative care. So the assisted dying service will focus debate rightly on the funding and organisation of our health services. I endorse all the thanks that have been expressed so far and won't repeat them, but I would like to add thanks to the acting Assisting Attorney General for his contributions. I think he spoke more yesterday than anyone. And the ability to call up multiple relevant clauses in the law without hesitation is a reminder, if I needed one, why I would never have made a career in law. I would also like to acknowledge the former Health Minister, Deputy Wilson, who also played her part in ensuring this legislation was progressed, despite, I think, we can possibly infer from her own personal views. And I would personally like to thank the officers involved in the Minister's Department, who have shown extraordinary stamina and incredible patience. I attended various public meetings, including one that we held in our parish to gauge public opinion. And where those officers interacted with the public, I think they showed absolutely amazing ability to handle the various intense emotions and views that were expressed with calm and dignity. And I think everybody who attended those meetings was also impressed. They've shown immense professionalism. So where have we got to? Well, sir, I believe a good law with strong safeguards. It feels seaworthy, and it's time to push it down the slipway.
Thank you, Deputy. The next member to speak in third reading is Deputy Dubler.
Thank you, sir. And I won't repeat any of the thanks that I gave in my speech on the second reading. But what I will do is draw members' attention to, I think, other people that we should be grateful to. And those are the campaigners in this area, and some beyond our own island. And actually some I bumped into last night, who may still be in the gallery today, who have actually travelled over to our little island to observe this debate and are watching with interest. I think Dignity in Dying is one of the groups there. There may be others. I know that the Humanists UK campaigners haven't been able to travel today, but they are watching. And we have these articles before us today, so not just because of the hard work of all the people that the officers and members that many people have mentioned, but actually because of the courage and the determination of many campaigners who have, I think, started the conversations probably beyond our shores. And we should be very, very grateful to them. And certainly there are individuals locally who have been part of those campaign groups and who have written us many emails and talked about their views and referred to those campaigns. I'm very pleased to say that Humanists UK has played a big part in that, and one individual, Nathan Stillwell, who has campaigned with such compassion and dedication and great knowledge of the subject. I'm very grateful to him and to all of the campaign groups. And so some of the speeches on the second reading, I was really moved by the Constable of St. John. I thought that was such a powerful speech from somebody of faith who actually, I find great similarities sometimes actually between those who have religious beliefs and my own humanist beliefs. Sometimes we actually have more in common. And I found that so interesting and moving, the conclusion that he had come to by way of his own religious beliefs that have actually brought him to a similar conclusion to me. Very powerful speech. But so the final group of people that I wanted to thank and pay tribute to is actually islanders who have died over the last few years, perhaps. Some of them are people who are known to us and family members that have been mentioned in some speeches. And I think all of us carry memories of losses that we have experienced, and that certainly shaped some of the decisions that we have made here today. And as a humanist, I believe, and humanists, we believe that we make our own meaning, and we make our lives meaningful by the choices that we make and the values that we hold. And when I think about people like Alan Dushma, who I think Deputy Miles mentioned in her speech, and also Gary Burgess was another person who I think has impacted this debate hugely. There are others as well, and I do hope that other people will mention anyone else who I've missed, any individuals who actually, even at the time of their own suffering and close to their own deaths, chose to speak out about this, knowing that actually things were not going to change in time for them, but knowing that they could perhaps add something to the conversation in our island to actually change things for others who come after them. And I remember having conversations with Gary Burgess about death and what a good death looks like. And I know that he reflected deeply on this. And I think their deaths are all the more meaningful for having had that impact and made that contribution to us making this change. And I hope that their families know that and can take some comfort from it. And yeah, so I remain grateful to all of the people I thanked yesterday and the campaign groups, including the humanists and others, and also islanders who have spoken out, even through their own suffering. They have helped to make real change, and I hope that their families will carry that with them and take some comfort from it.
Thank you, Deputy. The next member to speak is Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to try and stick to the words that I've wrote down because I've been so careful in what I say. But before I do, I have to say, I suppose I put my cards on the table. I'm not a religious man. I'm far from it. I'm probably the nearest to an atheist that you have. But in my work, in my representation, I go to, I think I'm in a unique position of visiting every single religious faith there is on the island, and we have our drop-ins in church halls, and we go to all of the different groups. I'm honoured to be invited to, this evening actually, to go to the mosque to see the breaking of the fasting today during Ramadan for iftar. And I've got to say, so one of my favourite meetings in my role is the Religious Education Advisory Council, because it is a model for the way the UN should be, where every single religion on our island sits around the table and discusses education. It's a wonderful experience, actually, and I have learnt so much. And so it gives me an opportunity, in a way, which I don't often get, to talk about the structuralist anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, who said that actually it's only by knowing the other that we know anything about our own culture. And so by knowing other opinions, by seeing other views, we learn a lot more about ourselves, and we can structure and function in our world and make rules. So those aren't abstract ideas, they're real ideas. And this leads me, I've segued myself into the words that I've written down, sir, because today we are not voting about an abstract principle. We are voting on concrete, careful designed model for assisted dying. A model shaped by years of consultation, evidence gathering, and the voices of islanders who asked us to confront the realities of end-of-life suffering with honesty and compassion. And death is not something that we talk about enough in our society. I think we all have a fear, and I understand that. I'm not going to talk about individuals, it's a little bit too personal, so I'm not going to go down that line, I'm afraid. Jersey has taken a uniquely thorough approach. We began with the citizens' jury, representing a broad cross-section of our community, who concluded after months of deliberation that assisted dying should be permitted under strict conditions. We then commissioned detailed ethical, legal and clinical advice, and now we have before us a proposed model that reflects Jersey's values of dignity, autonomy, safety and transparency. Let us be clear what this does. It restricts eligibility to assisted dying only to adults who are resident in Jersey, capable of making and communicating their own decision, and either terminally ill or experience serious or reversible medical condition. It's not a broad or permissive system. It's tightly defined. It embeds multiple layers of clinical safeguard. The model requires 2 independent doctors to assess eligibility, a mandatory reflection period, confirmation of decision-making capacity at every stage, and the option for clinicians to conscientiously object. No doctor is compelled, no patient is rushed, no decision is taken lightly. It provides pathways with clear protocols. This respects both patient preference and clinical judgment. It also aligns Jersey with the safest international models, ensuring that the method used is appropriate, controlled and medically supervised. It establishes strong oversight and accountability. So the model proposes a statutory monitoring body, mandatory reporting of every assisted death and independent review ensuring compliance. And the amendments have added yearly reports back to the Assembly and a 3-year review. That is a very transparent process. And so this is not something that's going to operate in the shadows, but it will do so hopefully with the respect for people's privacy. It also, so I believe, recognises that assisted dying and palliative care are not competitors but partners. The model explicitly commits to strengthening palliative care, ensuring that every islander, regardless of whether they have considered assisted dying, receives world-class support at the end of life. That's a challenge I know that we face as an island, and I would support anything that increases the capacity and the quality of palliative care. And the model before us is not rushed, reckless or untested. It is product of careful design. I mentioned before, and I'll mention the officers that I know. Some years ago, when I was on the scrutiny panel that was scrutinising some of this work, some time ago it started, many, many years ago, when it's in its first iterations. And so therefore, there's years of work that's gone on. There are safeguards that I believe can work. Vulnerable people are protected, abuse is exceptionally rare, and the presence of assisted dying off. And this is the point, sir, why I am supportive as much as anything else. The presence of the assisted dying will bring comfort to many, even if it is never used. The ability to control your own end of life, to me, is a very important part of my autonomy as a human being. And so this is the final points I will make. Beyond the evidence, there lies something that is far more fundamental, and that is the lived experience of islanders who have asked for this choice. People who want reassurance that when medicine can no longer help, the law will not stand in the way of their dignity. The model gives us and them assurance. It gives them control, it gives them clarity, it gives them compassion, a regulated option for an end of life. So we cannot remove death from life, but we can remove unnecessary suffering from dying, and we can do so in a way that is safe, humane, and uniquely tailored to Jersey. Supporting this is not about valuing life less. It is about valuing the person living their life, their autonomy, their identity, and incredibly importantly, their final wishes. I urge members to support in the third reading. I think it will, and to do so with confidence in what we've built is a good model. It ensures dignity that is not a privilege but a right. And I thank everybody for all of their contributions. It's been a very difficult time, but I think we've done so with dignity, and I think we've done so well across the Assembly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Next member to speak is Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this has been a long and winding road that's led us to the door of this third reading. And when we look back, we can see that the path that we've taken has been full of challenges. But despite many setbacks, the final destination has always been in sight, if at times only just. I want to say that, in my view, debates like this one show us off in a good light, maybe in our best light. Opinions have been argued and debated with decorum, with empathy, with understanding, but most importantly, with respect. States members have shown that even in such a small jurisdiction as ours, we can treat big, complicated, and morally challenging subjects, such as assisted dying, with respect. After all, respect is defined as where we accept something or someone for what they say, even if their opinion is different from our own, or we don't agree with them. So this has been a combined effort, without doubt. No stone has been left unturned. Many stones have been turned and put back where they were. But some have been turned, adjusted, and allowed to remain. And on that note, I would wish to thank the scrutiny panel for their part in this process. They have turned stones and shown us what good scrutiny should look like. Many of their findings and recommendations and amendments have been accepted by the Minister, while others have found their way to the floor of this Assembly for debate in the way they should do. Sir, I will leave it to the Minister to thank officers from both sides of town, if you like, from Maria House and from Union Street, and to thank the public for the huge input that they've had into our deliberations. But one person the Minister won't thank, sir, will be himself. And I'd just like to say that, in my opinion, his dogged determination to drive this law has been, in my mind, one of the overriding reasons that we are here today, about to vote in the third reading. Sir, I will have absolutely no hesitation in pushing the pour button at the end of this debate, and I would urge members to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The next member to speak in third reading is the Constable of Saint Brelade.
Thank you, sir. Not wishing to repeat the words of my minister just now, but I would start at the beginning and say I'm respectful of the health minister's tenacity in driving this proposition through. I appreciate that it's a matter close to his heart. And once again, sir, as others have mentioned, I'm grateful for the scrutiny panel's assiduity in reviewing every detail of this complex legislation. And this will certainly reinforce the protection of the vulnerable. And I've been pleased to support, I think, most of the amendments put through by the panel. So my position is driven not only by personal experience, but of course, as one gets closer to the departure gate of life, the mind sharpens to what one's exit strategy might be. I link this to my ex officio position on the management committee of a residential care home, where I truly fear the psychological effect that this legislation may have not only on my 50 vulnerable elderly residents, but also those in similar situations in the island. I feel, sir, for that reason, I must distance myself from supporting the draft legislation. Views that I've received personally from those involved professionally in healthcare are mixed, and this shakes my confidence in the draft. Finally, sir, my ethics simply do not allow me to support the concept. So, with apologies to the Minister, and indeed those who have had different experiences, I regret that I'm unable to support the proposed legislation for assisted dying. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Constable. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have also supported the articles of second reading and intend to continue to do so. That's because of my own views on this, and those views, of course, are informed by my own experiences and baggage in this area, and the views of people who have influenced me over the course of my life. Some of those were GPs who were very strongly in favour of this. I know there are other, as the Constable of St Brelade said, there are other medics who are deeply opposed to the subject. It's also something I indicated at hustings during last year's election, that I would support this in principle. So I feel for those constituents who may have been affected in their voting one way or the other, it is important to hold a consistent line. So that's not to say that I don't have continuing and abiding concerns about the operation of the law. The thing that I have always been concerned about is the question of capacity. I was involved in great detail in the work to implement and then put into operation and indeed effect the Capacity and Self-Determination Law of 2018. So I like to think I have a fairly strong understanding of issues around capacity, both how you assess it, how you then respond to it, and how you ensure that people are able to make such decisions as they are able to do within the scope of their own capacity. And I have spoken to officers very many times, well, certainly several times over the course of the last, actually, almost 4 years, and I'm grateful for their time in in indulging my concerns and assuring me that the capacity tests and the processes will work to ensure that capacity is carefully considered and that person does have capacity to make a decision. It matters then a great deal that the capacity assessment is carefully thought through. Saying to someone, we talked yesterday, I think Deputy Wren talked about authority bias. People are fearful of men in white coats, if they still wear them. We all know blood pressures rise in the presence of a doctor or a person in a white coat. We all know that. People are fearful and they don't want to look stupid. And a capacity assessment along the lines of, if we give you these drugs, you will die. Do you understand? Yes, that is nowhere near sufficient capacity assessment. Capacity has to be looked at very, very carefully, and I strongly, strongly hope that those conducting those assessments will do so very, very carefully and very thoughtfully. And the fact that someone says, yes, I understand, does not necessarily mean that they do. Those sorts, quite ironically, my views on capacity have been very much formed by a former colleague who was very, very knowledgeable on the subject and used, some of you may have come across him, I'm not going to name names, the experiences of his grandmother. And it's slightly ironic that I met him a couple of months ago and we talked about assisted dying, and I told him my concerns about capacity, and he was more concerned about coercion because of the nature of Jersey and the money that exists in some parts of this island. And he was more concerned about that. But capacity is important. What is also important is communication, how we communicate issues around assisted dying, both to the public at large and to those people who may need or want to take assisted dying. So you and I think the AG are broadly of a vintage. And I suspect you will remember at the start of your career that it was quite acceptable, well, certainly routine, for lawyers to pepper their documents and their letters with Latin phrases and words that we understood, but the clients might not. And over a period of time, we have had that knocked out of us. We have been told that that's not acceptable. I'm sure Deputy Balash mourns the loss of French in court judgments and in our laws. But we've been told it's not acceptable to write in a way that people don't understand, that we must be shorter in our use of language, that we must be clear in our use of language, that people must understand. And I'm not sure from documents that I've seen in my relatively recent career from doctors that they have been through that process. I don't think doctors necessarily always communicate well. They have their own technical jargon, they use their shorthand that they understand, but patients might not. And it is important that all doctors involved in this process go through that same process that we've gone through of learning to communicate well. That also extends to government. Government does not communicate well with citizens. That's been something I tried very hard to do as Minister for Social Security, to try to get communications better. And the answer is often, yes, but this is a legal process and we've got to describe this is a legal letter and we've got to explain that. But as I often say, we must tell people what the law means and not what it says. So government's own communications in this have got to be critical, and they cannot just be written in Warrior House by lawyers. We have got to write in a way that people genuinely, clearly understand. That is one of the most critical things of all. And it's something that most lawyers working in government will know that I've told them several times by now. Having said all that, sir, it is very difficult, I find, and while I do support the legislation, I find it difficult, in fact impossible, to feel remotely uplifted by the decision we are, I think, almost certainly going to make today. I don't feel it to be a cause for celebration, because what we have to remember is that there will be very, very many people, I'd say almost, numbers vary, but I'd say for every person who will be pleased with this legislation coming into force, there will be others who will be very disappointed. there will also be people who are frankly frightened by this law coming into force. And it's a pity that we haven't seen them. We've seen the pro-lobby outside, who seem to be very professionally corralled and supported, and it's a pity in some respects that the opposing people have not had that same support to put their view forward. And what I think is deeply unfortunate, and I know it's a matter of personal belief and personal view, but I think that it is really unfortunate for those people that even before we have finished a debate on this law, we are looking at a proposition to extend it even further. For those people, that is the slippery slope writ large. We haven't even got the law in place, but that is their concern. And we have to accept that people are frightened. And I think it's unfortunate we've got that tabled, but that will be debated another day. And so what I'm going to say last is finally that none of us, the decision about the value of a life can only ever rest with the person whose life it is. No one should ever make a decision about whether a life is worth living. And I'll give you an example of that, and it's I'm going to try and be very sparing of details because I can't remember who told me this story and I don't want anybody to feel they've been identified. So a few years ago, I met someone who told me about a friend of theirs who had spent 6 months in the presence of someone who had a very severe medical condition which caused profound paralysis. And that person could only move their eyelids, and they communicated by blinking their eyes at an iPad. And the person telling us the stories had said to the friend who had spent all this time in the presence of that person, but you wouldn't want, having seen all that, you wouldn't want to live like that, would you? And the friend said, yes, I would, because even if I could only move one eyelid, I would want to stay alive and see my children. Everybody has things that life is worth living for. And none of us should ever put ourselves in a position or be in a position where we make a decision about whether another person's life is worth living. And we just have to remember that throughout that debate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading?
Yes.
No other?
Sir.
Constable of St Saviour.
Thanks, sir. I will be very brief, sir. I won't repeat anything I've said previously, but I will be brief. There are occasions, sir, when people in life fall into a deep, deep depression and for reasons best known to themselves, decide to take their own life. Some people take pills and often as not they are saved, taken to hospital, and I won't go into details, but within a day or so they're released back into the community, most of which deeply regret their actions and go on to have a full and active life. Now, I know we're talking about two different types of people here, that the people in a draft-assisted dying are approaching the end of their lives, but it is the ability to change their mind that I have trouble with, and it is the waiver that I have a problem with, that it's just not set in stone yet. And the other item that also bothers me deeply is if it's a member of your family and you're trying to persuade them not to go through with it, then you will be accused of coercively trying to prevent them from doing something which could be unlawful. And it's these two items that trouble me deeply, and for that reason, I cannot support the draft-assisted dying Jersey law. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Constable. The Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I will also be brief, but I think it's worth just making the point again, because it's an important one. The principles of this legislation have been thoroughly debated and the detail carefully tested and refined. The safeguards within the law have been carefully clarified and strengthened through the scrutiny and amendment process, sir. But it does remain a matter of conscience for every member. I haven't shared any personal details during this debate, sir, but it's a great matter of conscience for myself, and has required a great deal of deep thought. I have sat at the bedside of two parents who suffered a rather long and quite uncomfortable death, notwithstanding the excellent care they had at the time. And I am reminded of an Australian Aboriginal proverb, sir, that says, "We are just all visitors to this time and place. We are passing through. Our purpose here is to learn, to observe, to grow, and to love, and then we return home." And if this piece of legislation can make that journey just a little bit more comfortable for some, sir, then I am pleased to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. The Connétable of St Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. I have been pondering as to whether or not to speak on this today, because members know that yesterday I voted against all the amendments, and indeed when we had finished yesterday evening, one member said to me, "Deirdre, your button seems to have been stuck today." And indeed it was, and I think on a number of occasions I was the only one who voted against the amendment. And someone kept saying, "Can we have the one, please?" So my name was called out quite a few times yesterday. But I feel that I should tell members why I voted against everything, and I will vote against the law in third reading. And we have been discussing this for some 5 years, but my mind was made up on this some 40 years ago when I was a very keen A-level student at Holier. Well, I think I was keen, I hope I was. And I was studying a relatively new A-level at that time called General Studies. And we had a very dynamic General Studies teacher. I hope I can name him, sir, Mr. Sid Labai, well-known, well-liked, and highly thought of. And he invited us to see a film which he thought would do us all the world of good. And that film has haunted me for the past 40 years, sir, and it is called Soylent Green. And if I may just, for members who may not be aware of it, just set the scene a little bit about the film. So it was set in a dystopian future of dying oceans, year-round humidity caused by the greenhouse effect, with the resulting pollution, depleted resources, poverty, and overpopulation worldwide. Those severe worldwide shortages of food, water, and housing took civilization to the brink of collapse. And only the elite could afford their spacious apartments, clean water, and natural food in the walled-off communities in which they lived, which were patrolled by armed guards. Meanwhile, the majority of the population lived in squalor. They hauled water from communal spigots, and they ate highly processed wafers made by a large food processing firm known as the Soylent Corporation. That corporation introduced, over time, a more nutritious wafer made from plankton, and it was known as Soylent Green. Their other wafers, I think, had been red and one yellow. Let's cut to the end of the film, sir. Oceanographic reports came to light showing that the oceans were dying and could not produce the plankton to make the Soylent Green wafer. As it turned out, the ingredients for Soylent Green, since they could not find plankton, there was none, the ingredients became the human bodies that were obtained from those poor in the population who sought relief from their poverty through the assisted suicide that was available at government clinics. So we're talking 1976. As I say, 40 years ago. The film was actually set in the future in 2022, which to me seems a long time in the past. Now, but the film's closing words have stayed with me forever, sir. From when I first saw it all those 40 years ago, Soylent Green is people. Soylent Green is people. I think it's probably the only phrase from any film that I've watched in my life that I can remember. But is that dystopian future almost here with us now? What do we have? We have the greenhouse effect. We have overpopulation. We have depleted resources, and we have extreme poverty. If it's not quite here, it's certainly on its way. What we don't yet have, as we saw in the film, are the extremes of state-sponsored suicide. But the introduction of this law could, I fear, be the first step towards that. We just do not know the reality of how the law could be amended in the future. My real concern is the prospect of eligibility criteria creep. And as Deputy Miller mentioned earlier, I believe that is something that Deputy Southern is proposing within the lifetime of this Assembly. And I think Deputy Gorst referred to that when he spoke. So those concerns remain with me. I have been haunted for 40 years by the film Soylent Green. With reference to what Deputy Melissa said, sir, she mentioned those people who were frightened. And I have to admit, I am frightened. I'm frightened that potentially the law could be amended. However improbable it seems to us today, we cannot, I'm sure most of us sitting here cannot imagine that the law could be amended to have the extremes as we saw in the film. But I cannot support something, sir, I cannot support a law that could set us on the pathway to the dystopian future of Soylent Green. Thank you.
So I wonder if the Constable would give way for a point of clarification. I was listening carefully to her speech, and I just wondered whether she was aware of the original source material that movie was based on, which is a book called Make Room by Harry Harrison, and actually doesn't include the twist that she named, and the food in that in the book, which is the original source material, is actually based on soy and lentils, and the book is based around unchecked population growth and doesn't actually include that horrifying twist that the Constable named.
Happy to clarify, sir. I am aware of the source material, I think from 1966. However, it is the film that has focused my attention on this law, and it is the film that has made my mind up as to the way I will vote today, sir. And the Deputy used the word horrifying It is. It's a horrifying twist, which none of us can, I'm sure, expect will happen, but which could do. That's my point. It could do.
Thank you, Conatab. The next member to speak is Deputy Scott.
Well, sir, I had a different education, and yeah, it's quite a depressing film from what I hear. And I would say, even in terms of some of the themes in overpopulation and these things, the world is a different place now. I've been fortunate enough to read books by Hans Rosner and Stephen Pinkerton about actually how society has improved for the better, whilst at the same time, some of the concerns that we had. I remember my own father talking about one 18th century writer suggesting that we would have to eat insects because of overpopulation, but in fact, statistically, the actual trend's changing. But I do think that film had an important point, and that is about how important it is as us, as a States Assembly, to prevent the abuse of power. And that has informed me a lot in my work as a States member, my work in looking at the Ombudsman, and the work I have personally done at looking at this law, because that is one of the reasons why I spoke in respect of one of the safeguards. This won't be the first jurisdiction that has such a law to support people at the end of their lives with choice, and I'll quickly come back to that. Because the Constable St Saviour, I believe, and this was the basic point I was going to make, was he suggested that people wouldn't be able to change their mind, and the law isn't structured like that. At any time that they have capacity, they can change their mind. There's nothing that's going to stop them. They can actually decide to postpone the decision to a later date. And if they don't have capacity to make a decision, at that point they do not have capacity. And that's where we've already had that discussion. I feel incredibly uncomfortable when we talk about suicide, which so often affects people who are young and healthy, suffering from psychological conditions of, and it's a very different situation from people at the end of their lives. But here's the thing about that particular choice. There may well be times in the lives of people, even sitting here, when things have got really bad and you've actually thought about that choice and it's been available to you, but you've actually thought, no, I understand that's a point choice. And for some, and I know this might sound strange, it almost makes things more bearable because, oh, if it's pain, it's temporary. Everything's temporary in a sense. And you can bring forward it. But most of us will be saying, just as the lady who could just only operate an iPad with one eye, that nevertheless I see value in life, and this is life for me, and I want to hang on to it. And basically, this law doesn't take away any of those particular choices. In my experience, the elderly are less fearful of men in white coats than of hospitals and dying in them. So it remains really important that the options of palliative care and proper end-of-life plans that discuss that are actually put into the equation, and they have been. Lastly, there was some mention about pounds and pennies again. The social and emotional benefit of this option, we can't quantify. I know many of us have been distressed as family members to see people who, notwithstanding the drugs as opposed to relieve pain, and that have actually seen end-of-life suffering. I know that some of us have religious views about this. I think it's complicated being a Christian, particularly when even your own church has been associated with culpability and the imposition of death. But when I go to church, I do so to remind myself of love and forgiveness and what I believe is that nature. And I go to church even more now, having become a States member, to remind myself of those things. So so I commend this law and
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I want to begin by acknowledging, as others, the enormous amount of work that has gone into this law. I know many members supporting it do so from a place of compassion. This is deeply complex and emotional issue, and I respect that. For me, my opposition is not based only on my Christian faith, although my faith does shape my belief in the value of life. It is also because I'm not fully satisfied that every safeguard is strong enough when the consequence is irreversible, and when the possibility of expanding eligibility or options may always be on the horizon. I struggle with the inconsistency as well, especially in a medical system still needing desperately more funding to save lives. If someone stands on the edge of a building wanting to end their life, we call it a tragedy. We intervene through the suicide prevention strategy. We send support, we fund counseling, we do everything possible to save them, even though their reason might be related with severe or terminal illness. Yet in another setting, the same person can then express a wish to die via the assisted dying, then the states may ultimately facilitate that death. I find it difficult to reconcile those two positions. Where is the clear moral line? I have deep empathy for people who are suffering, and I understand the desire for relief from pain. I believe expanding palliative care, dignity, and choice in treatment, but I cannot escape the fact that diagnoses are sometimes wrong. People outlive prognosis. Some recover when no hope was given. Miracles, whether medical or otherwise, do happen. If we pass this law, even with safeguards, which I still believe are not sufficient, we accept that some lives will end earlier than otherwise might have. For me, even one life lost too soon is too many. With compassion for those who disagree and with respect for the work done, I cannot support this legislation.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? If no other member wishes to speak, I call upon the Minister to reply.
Sir, this has been an extremely interesting and a very detailed debate right up to the end, but it is time to draw the debate to a close. And before I call for the appel in the third reading, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the long 5-year journey that's brought us to this point and all those who've contributed to it. I want to thank a number of people, and I know that they've already been thanked, but I think it's important that we're thorough on this. And I'd first like to thank all my fellow States members for their willingness to grapple with the issue of assisted dying, and for their thoughtful and informed contributions, and indeed for their kind and generous personal comments. I particularly want to acknowledge the contribution of the Assisted Dying Scrutiny Panel, the hard work of their officers, and the wise counsel of their advisors. And I'd like to make particular mention of the Chair, Deputy Dublé, for her constructive, helpful manner in which she's led the team. Importantly, I want to thank the people of Jersey who've actively shaped and developed this law, all those who've shared their hopes and concerns, and spoken with such candour about death and dying, often having to relive some of their life's worst experiences in so doing. So thank you to each and every one of them. On behalf of all members, I'd like to extend our thanks to the hard-working team at the GREF, to the Acting Attorney General, who's had a very busy couple of days, and of course you, sir, for guiding us very ably through this complicated process on your very first time in the chair. Finally, and I hope members won't mind, but I've saved a special mention for the two officers, and I know we don't use names, but we all know who they are, who've worked tirelessly and professionally over this long period. We do now have a world-class assisted dying law, and this is in no small part due to their exceptional efforts. So, sir, I hope all members will join me in saying a final thank you to them. And on that, I call for the appel.
Thank you, Minister. So the appel has been called for, and I invite members to return to their seats. So if all members have had the chance to return to their seats, I will ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the assisted dying law has been adopted in third reading. 32 votes pour, 16 votes contre, and no abstentions. Very well. So we move on to the next item of public business, which is the draft Marriage and Civil Partnership, Dissolution and Separation Jersey Law, which has been lodged by the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. The main respondent is the chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. And members will recall that the debate resumes following the adoption of the principles on the 2nd of November last year and a referral to the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. Minister, you've lodged an amendment to the articles. Do you wish to propose the articles as amended?
Yes, please, sir.
Are all members content to take the articles as amended? Thank you. How do you wish to propose the articles, Minister?
Sir, I would propose to put them on block, sir.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak?
Yes, please, sir. Sir, we return to the debate on P85/2025, the draft Marriage and Civil Partnership, Dissolution and Separation Jersey Law, the principles of which were approved in November of last year. This is an important and long overdue modernisation of Jersey's family law. Since approving the principles, the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel has reviewed the draft law. I would like to thank the panel for the valuable work that they have undertaken on this matter. As a result of this, I've lodged some minor technical amendments to the draft law and will continue discussions with relevant parties on more detailed issues, with any further minor amendments to be progressed in future regulations, an approach which is supported by the panel. Before turning to the draft law and the amendments, I want to briefly remind members of the overall effect of this draft law. This legislation creates a single, modern and unified system for ending marriages and civil partnerships, replacing the outdated laws from 1949 and 2012. It removes the requirement to assign blame when these relationships break down, recognising that they do not always endure and that the law should not make their ending more painful than necessary. Importantly, these reforms also strengthen protections for victims of any form of domestic abuse by reducing opportunities for coercion and controlling behaviour. Under the principles agreed by the Assembly, the draft law provides no-fault dissolution, allowing couples to simply declare that their marriage or civil partnership has ended without needing to assign fault. Immediate access, allowing applications for dissolution at any time after a marriage or civil partnership begins, removing the need to spend years waiting in limbo. The end of contested applications, preventing one party from prolonging the dissolution process or trapping the other in a marriage or civil partnership they wish to leave. Unified terminology introducing the term dissolution, conditional order and final order from the ending of both marriages and civil partnership, while acknowledging that divorce will continue to be used informally to describe the end of a marriage. Enabling future consideration to be given to pension sharing. This legislation does not make ending a relationship easy. It simply aims to remove unnecessary conflict where possible. It protects children by reducing hostility and continues to align Jersey with best practice adopted elsewhere. I will briefly, sir, highlight the effect of the key provisions in the draft law. Under Article 2, jurisdiction for dealing with dissolution remains with the family court of the Royal Court, family division of the Royal Court, ensuring continuity and maintaining judicial expertise. The residency and domicile requirements have been modernised, that so only one party must be domiciled in Jersey, reflecting principles of equality. The court retains the discretion to determine whether it has jurisdiction to deal with dissolution and all related matters, which provides an important safeguard against dissolution, tourism or forum shopping, as it is commonly known. Article 3 introduces a no-fault dissolution system, removing the requirement for an applicant to assign blame and allowing applications at any time after a marriage or civil partnership has been informed. An application for dissolution must be in the prescribed form and include a signed statement that the applicant or applicants seek the dissolution of their marriage or civil partnership. The existing two-stage process is retained, but the maximum period between conditional and final orders is extended to 6 months, with the court retaining discretion to reduce that period where appropriate. Article 4 of the law retains the option for formal separation, whereby couples remain married or in a civil partnership while being formally separated for legal purposes. Articles 6 to 10 modernise the grounds for annulment, removing outdated grounds such as non-consummation. Articles 11 and 12 address presumption of death, setting out the circumstances which an applicant who believes their partner has died may apply for dissolution. Reflecting the fact that the decision to end a marriage or civil partnership may be made jointly, Article 13 allows applications for dissolution to be submitted either jointly or by individuals. Article 16 gives the court the power to adjourn dissolution proceedings and direct couples to participate in alternative dispute resolution services. The court already promotes and encourages the use of these services in divorce and dissolution proceedings, as it may help limit costs and, importantly, promote early resolution and the reduction of acrimony and significantly raise the risk of emotional harm to children. It being acknowledged that it is not parental separation which harms children, but parent acrimony. Article 18 confirms that once the final dissolution order is made, individuals are free to marry or enter a civil partnership, while religious representatives rightly retain discretion over whether to solemnise such marriages in their places of worship. The welfare of children is an important matter, sir, and this is reflected in Article 19, where the court retains the power to delay issuing final orders if matters relating to children require further consideration. The ending of succession rights upon dissolution, unless otherwise specified, are dealt with in Article 20. My amendment proposes that the reference to this article is removed from later articles. Part 4, which encompasses Articles 21 to 40, addresses how financial and other related matters will be dealt with. These articles largely replicate existing arrangements but introduce key reforms, including the recognition of nuptial agreements and trusts in Article 22. One of the ongoing challenges in current proceeding is the lack of certainty in financial outcomes. The draft law addresses this by creating a presumption that nuptial agreements and trusts are binding, provided that certain safeguards are met. Where they are not, the court retains discretion to vary, modify, or terminate the terms of the agreement or trust. The fairness of any such agreement is key. Article 29 provides the states with the ability to introduce pension sharing in the future. Currently, pensions cannot be shared on divorce or dissolution and instead sometimes offset against other assets, a method that is not always fair and feasible. The draft law creates a mechanism for pension sharing to be added later, sir, offering a more balanced approach than simply offsetting. Because pension sharing is a technically complex reform, the draft law prioritises delivering no-fault dissolution now while putting in place the framework needed to develop pension sharing provisions at a later stage. The option for the court to order a clean financial break between the parties is in Article 32. This allows the court to end future financial claims whilst preserving obligations towards any children. Such an approach is generally preferred at the conclusion of proceedings as it provides clarity, certainty and the opportunity for parties to move forward with their lives. Currently, when assessing the financial arrangements of parties, the court is guided by the principles embedded in Section 25 of the England and Wales Matrimonial Clauses Act 1973, which together with the case law that has developed focus on needs, sharing and contributions, all against a backdrop of fairness. The law does not currently and will not in future mandate an equal 50-50 split of the current assets on dissolution. This is merely a starting point. To further assist the court, the Section 25 factors are reflected in Article 31 of the draft law. There are further provisions introducing interim occupation orders, legal cost assistance and strong deterrence against the powers to remedy asset concealment and asset dispossession. Together, these measures aim to uphold integrity and promote fairness while offering support where needed to those who may be financially weaker or otherwise vulnerable. Sir, I am pleased that these measures go further than ever before to ensure that where a financially controlling party has been able to manipulate matters during the marriage or civil partnership, the court will be able to provide a remedy during proceedings, even in relation to events that have occurred before those proceedings were issued. Finally, parts 5 to 7 consolidate outdated laws, ensure recognition of overseas divorces and dissolutions, and provide administrative and transitional frameworks for the introduction of new legislation and processes for the dissolution of a marriage or civil partnership. Sir, should the Assembly decide to approve this draft legislation, further work will be required before the changes it contains can come into effect. 2 existing sets of rules of court, which separately govern the processes to end a marriage or civil partnership, will need to be fully updated and consolidated into a single comprehensive set of court rules. The timing of this work will be a matter for the court to determine, but I am sure there will be pressure from the legal profession for it to be progressed as a priority. In closing, sir, this draft law is modern, compassionate and practical. It aims to remove unnecessary conflict and provides greater clarity for families during what can be a challenging transition. It balances fairness with flexibility, judicial discretion with predictability, and individual rights with social responsibility. It also provides greater support for those who wish to leave an abusive marriage or civil partnership. I commend the law, sir, and ask the Assembly to support it in the second reading. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the articles as amended seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the articles as amended? I have quite a few, so I think start with Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. The panel has published a comments paper since we called this matter in. A number of legal issues had been raised quite late in the day, and all these are explained in the comments paper dated 18th of February. Since calling in the matter, the panel has studied the issues raised by the Jersey Family Law Association, discussed them with the ministerial team, and met and discussed with one of our family court judges. One of the main issues raised was the non-inclusion in the draft law of the grounds of irretrievable breakdown. In the comments paper, members will find a table showing the grounds for divorce in different jurisdictions. And while Jersey's grounds will be different to most other jurisdictions, the panel accepts that this will not impact on the practical application of the law. There were other concerns raised by the Jersey Family Law Association, and while some disagreements remain, these can be addressed in the regulations, as the Minister has just stated. Also, the Minister has amended the law in response to some of the issues that were raised already. So the panel supports both the draft law and the draft amendment. The panel does, however, ask the Minister to confirm that she will be initiating discussions to consider whether the following matters should be addressed through further regulations ahead of the law's enforcement. So firstly, adapting the wording of the law to ensure there is explicit power provided to the court to revoke a conditional order. Secondly, adapting the wording of the law to clarify suitable provisions for children, particularly when over the age of 18. And finally, adapting the wording to allow further court discretion around orders for payment in respect of legal services. So we do ask the Minister to clarify those points, but we can assure the Assembly that after much consideration, that the panel does support the amended draft law.
Thank you, Chair. The next member to speak in second reading is Deputy Jeune.
Thank you, sir. And glad to follow the chair of the scrutiny panel and thank them for their comments and recommendations, and fully support their request for some clarification from the Minister. I support this draft law and the articles in second reading that have been put forward, in particular the long overdue introduction of no-fault divorce. Removing fault is not just an administrative tidy-up, it's a substantive safeguard. By preventing a respondent from defending the fact of divorce, we remove one of the mechanisms that can be used to prolong proceedings, drive up legal costs, and exert financial or emotional pressure. For individuals experiencing coercive or controlling behaviour, that matters. It limits the opportunity for a difficult separation to be weaponised. It shifts the process away from blame and towards resolution. Earlier and yesterday, we spoke about the importance of this Assembly being willing to make meaningful change, and this is another example of that. It modernises our law, reflects contemporary understanding of relationships and harm, and brings dignity and fairness to what is already a difficult life event. It is a practical reform, but it's also a principled one. And so I wrote to the Minister in written question 38/2026 to seek clarity on how coercive and controlling behaviour has been considered within this draft law, particularly around financial arrangements and matters concerning children. And this is not theoretical. This question did not come from a theory-based, but it was because I was contacted by islanders over the last few years as part of my role, who have shared their experiences of how the current system can be used to prolong harm. So by removing the ability to contest the divorce itself, this law removes a significant lever of control, and this is not a small tweak, it is meaningful protection. And on financial matters, the draft law strengthened the court's hand, as we've heard from the Minister. Article 31 retains established principles, including the ability to take serious conduct into account where it would be unfair to ignore it. It also goes further. Article 34 introduces interim occupation orders. That matters in situations where one party may have controlled access to the family home. It allows the court to regulate occupation while matters are resolved, providing immediate and practical stability. Article 36 enables the court to order payment in respect of legal services. Financial abuse often involves restricting access to funds for representation. This provision helps level the playing field so that a financially weaker party is not shut out of justice. Article 40 addresses transactions designed to defeat financial claims. In coercive situations, assets can be dissipated or transferred to frustrate orders. This article gives the court the power to intervene where there has been deliberate manipulation. Article 16 allows the court to direct parties towards alternative dispute resolution. Of course, alternative dispute resolution must be approached carefully where abuse is present, but the court retains discretion. It is not automatic, it is considered. And for the arrangement of children, they, of course, as we heard from the Minister, remain governed by the Children Law 2022, where the children's welfare is paramount. And I do welcome the confirmation that the independent review of the family court system in domestic abuse cases will examine further whether legislation, guidance and procedures are sufficient and whether further strengthening is required. That ongoing work is essential and I will continue to follow this. So this law is not solely about abuse, it applies to all couples, but it's right that we examine it through that lens. No fault of divorce is designed to reduce conflict, and conflict is often the environment in which coercion thrives. This is a measured and modern reform. It again reflects contemporary understanding of relationships, strengthens safeguards and removes unnecessary hostility from an already painful process. And for these reasons, I'm very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Jean. The next member to speak is the Connétable of St Brelard.
Thank you, sir. My point is fairly fine, and it's something whether the Minister is able to answer or may need to be the Attorney General. My question is over what used to be the right of dower, and whether that is translated into the new law. I thought it had gone. Does it still exist? I'm not sure, and that's my question. I was looking at Article 25, and I couldn't see any reference to it.
Thank you, Connétable.
Thank you, sir.
The next member to speak is Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. And on the in principle debate for this legislation, I made a couple of points, one of which I'll reiterate now. I think Deputy Jean touched on it in her speech, and it was around what's in the best interests of children. And the research into child development and child psychology shows very clearly that high conflict separations between parents, that's damaging for children, and minimising conflict is what is in the best interests of the child. And I feel that this law will go a long way towards helping children who, through no fault of their own, of course, find themselves in this situation, and hopefully that will be able to ease some of those difficult situations. And I also spoke about domestic abuse, which, again, other debates at this sitting we have spoken about, and we've spoken about coercive control and emotional abuse and how that can be entirely hidden and actually can impact women and men. It can impact people of any gender and can be any type of person as well. And I do believe that this law will go some way towards helping victims of that type of abuse specifically. And it's the ability to not have to wait the 3 years. And the scrutiny panel did a great job with their comments, and it really helped me to form my thoughts on this. And I'm fully supportive of the law. And the scrutiny panel indeed mentioned the 3-year limit at the moment, that there is some ability for the court to exercise discretion and reduce that, but that currently, even where there is firm evidence of abuse, that isn't happening at the moment. So it's very hard to provide evidence of coercive control and emotional abuse. So I can imagine that there will be a lot of people, mostly women, who have suffered greatly because of this law, the way it is at the moment. And there will be a suffering eased by this new law. Something that the panel raised in their comments, which I thought was very interesting and I wanted to comment on, it's near the end of their comments paper, and they've said that there is no changes to pension sharing at this time. And I wanted the Minister to respond to this, because the panel have recommended that this is looked at in the future and that pension sharing arrangements can be included in the law. And this is something I think we need to talk about more, and we need to shine a light on this more, is that there is a significant pension gap in Jersey. I have raised it previously, and I believe other deputies have as well. And it's something, again, it's largely hidden. And the reason for it is that domestic labour is largely performed by women, and also child caring responsibilities largely fall to women still. This is changing slowly, but the research shows that the responsibilities for those tasks largely fall to women. And of course, if one is not in paid employment, but is instead working in the home, and it is work and should be recognised as such, there is no remuneration for that work, there is often no recognition for it, and there is often no acknowledgement of that contribution to the marriage, which enables the other parent or the other partner to actually go out and be in the workplace and to gain money for their employment. That work that is done in the home, the washing, the cleaning, the cooking of dinners, that work enables another adult oftentimes to actually go out and be economically active and to put money into a pension. But then, of course, when a divorce occurs, that pension often will not be allocated to the partner who was working in the home. And that is a great injustice, I feel, and one that is largely hidden at the moment. And it's largely hidden, I think, because of the way that our society often sees older women as invisible. And I would like any women in Jersey who have suffered from this situation in our legislation to consider speaking up about it, actually, and speaking to us about it. And for my fellow members, I would encourage them, sir, to consider this and talk to their constituents about it. And let's try to highlight this issue and make some progress on it. So I'd really like the Minister to comment on that specific point, which I thank the panel for raising that in their comments. There's some great work they've done there, and I am largely supportive of the legislation. I note that I think it was 2015 that we first had a debate about it, which was my second year as a States member, and it's one of these big changes, similar to the first debate that we've had this week, sir. That we should not underestimate actually how big this is and how much of a positive impact this will have at a really difficult time in many people's lives. So I thank the Minister for the work that she's done in actually getting it to the point that we can vote on it today.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the articles in second reading? If no other member wishes to speak, then I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I thank the panel for their work. Yes, sir, in relation to members might wonder why there seems to have been some sort of changes and things moving, and there was a need for the panel to do further work, and that is related to the fact, as the deputy behind me said, this has been going on for a significant period of time, since 2015, I believe. And there's been some discussion with various parties, and I think it reflects that some of the matters that were raised, there were different parties that have different views on them. So a pragmatic sort of approach was taken in relation to certain parts, and that's why there will be further discussion that will go moving forward. In relation to the matters that the panel bring up, then yes, of course, the officer that has been working on this particular piece of legislation has actually been working on it, I believe, for the entire period of time in relation to the ongoing work. I thank for the Deputy Jeanne for her comments, because in actual fact, she's right that she asked a number of questions in relation to this, and this is exceptionally important when you're looking at domestic violence in relation to being able to dissolve a marriage or civil partnership without having to show that there's a reason why, sir. In relation to the question asked by the Constable of St Brelade, sir, the domicile provisions have actually been changed and modernised, and they are now sitting under Article 2. But the changes reflect modern-day principles where wives have not been required to adopt their husband's domicile in Jersey since 2023.
Minister, I hesitate to interrupt, but
Sorry,
I think the question was concerning Dower, and the Attorney General has put his light on.
Oh, sorry, I thought sorry, sorry, sir.
Yes, so I invite the Attorney General to speak.
Sir, the right to dower is dealt with in the Wills and Successions law. It is a right enjoyed to real property by the surviving spouse or surviving civil partner. This law is on a different matter, and it doesn't affect the Wills and Successions law, because this law is not concerned with surviving spouses and surviving partners, because there's been an annulment or a dissolution. So the issue doesn't arise.
Minister, sorry, please continue.
So, sorry, sir, my apologies. I've got my dowers and my domiciles muddled up today. In relation to the question that Deputy Doublé asks in relation to pension sharing, I think part of the reason why this journey in relation to this law and this coming forward now is because of the technical issues in relation to the pension sharing and the work that's required in relation to doing that. That work is ongoing, and within the law there is a framework that's going to be put in place in order that that can be done moving forward. So I think it was more about the work is ongoing, and the law, we didn't want to wait to the law, we didn't want to delay the law any further whilst those matters were looked at and brought forward. So I fully identify that the law needs to have a look at all aspects of financial arrangements, and of course, rightly, pension arrangements, because there will be parties within a marriage or civil partnership where one will contribute significantly to a pension and have a significant pension fund at the end of their working life, where others potentially will not. And in the past, what has always happened is that usually the pension is brought into the generic of all of the overall arrangements. But of course, a pension is something that somebody has for their lifetime. And so, of course, they will benefit long term for it. So these are matters, sir, that will and are being looked at effectively at this stage. But it was more about not delaying this law any further, sir.
Thank you. Do you call for the appel, Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
The appel has been called for. Oh, sorry. The chair of the scrutiny panel.
Yes, I just wonder if the Minister could respond to what I asked, which was if she would confirm that she would be initiating discussions to consider 3 particular matters before the enactment of the law, which were around conditional orders, provision for children, and orders of payment.
My apologies, sir. I thought I had actually agreed that I would do that, sir.
Thank you. So the appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. If all members have returned to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Thank you, and I can announce that the draft law, the articles as amended, have been adopted. 45 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. Minister, do you wish to propose the draft law in third reading?
Yes, please, sir.
Do you wish to speak in third reading, Minister?
I'd just like to thank all those parties that have participated in this, obviously the scrutiny panel, but also the extensive work that's been done by the Law Commission. And it was a long time ago, sir, that they actually published their report, and we are where we are today. The Family Court Judge, alongside the Family Law Association and the Law Drafting Officer. And thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is the matter seconded? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? I had Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask the Minister if she had a time scale for the further work that's going to be done on the pension sharing, please, even if she can just give a ballpark. That would be helpful to know, and I'm pleased to see that it is still going to go ahead, that work, and thank the Minister for that.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? No other member wishes to speak. Then I call upon the Minister to reply.
Sir, I thank the Deputy for that question, but however, I don't have a ballpark figure, but I will certainly make inquiries with the officer that's been doing all of this work, and hopefully we'll be able to get her an answer sometime today. Thank you, sir. And I ask for the appel, sir.
Appel's been called for. I ask members to return to their seats, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of voting or casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Thank you, and I can announce that the law has been adopted in third reading, 46 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. The next item of public business is the draft Heritage Jersey Law, lodged by the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, and the main respondent is the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. So I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Heritage Jersey Law 2000, a law to provide for the securing of Jersey's archaeological heritage, the reporting, recording and preservation of objects of archaeological and historical significance to Jersey and for connected purposes. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Thank you. Minister, do you wish to propose the articles? Oh, propose the law, the principles rather.
Yes, sir. Thank you, I do. Thank you, sir. Sir, I know in this assembly, and not just confined to this assembly, Jersey, people in Jersey have an incredible appreciation of their heritage. And a lot of the work we do in this assembly is informed by our heritage, and I know members hold Jersey's heritage dear. So I'm delighted to be able to bring forward the draft Heritage Jersey Law 20, which, if passed by the Assembly, would be the first time, which is incredible given how much we value our heritage, it would be the first time that Jersey has introduced legislation that seeks to protect Jersey's archaeological heritage by introducing clear legal obligations for reporting, recording, investigating and preserving objects and sites of archaeological significance for the island's benefit. We all know and believe that Jersey's archaeological and cultural heritage is a vital part of the island's identity, collective memory and scientific record, a valuable resource for historical and scientific research. However, as we stand here today, Jersey lacks a clear and comprehensive legal framework in this area. The existing approach relies heavily on customary law and voluntary reporting, which does not provide sufficient clarity or protection. This draft law, if supported, will be the most significant issue to be addressed in heritage for the last 30 years. Before we discuss the draft law, I would like to take the opportunity to thank members and officers of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel for their work in scrutiny and for their supportive comments on the draft law, which members were able to read. I would also like to thank the many individuals and organisations who have a particular interest in the matter, from within and outside the island, who contributed to the public consultation on both the draft law and the proposed draft regulations with regards to reward in archaeological licences. The draft code of practice was also included in this consultation. As well as asking broad questions on the draft legislative bundle, including principles of the need for heritage legislation, which was strongly supported, there are more specific questions on definitions of an archaeological object, Jersey national antiquity, and treasure trove. There were also questions on regulations on valuation of reward and licensing of archaeological excavations, which were equally supportive, but do not form part of the proposition today. With such a specific topic, responses were limited, with 37 responses, resulting in around 25 further amendments to the draft legislation. A formal response to this public consultation was published earlier this month. And sir, I would like to thank and take the opportunity to thank both the Office of the Lieutenant Governor for its support with addressing the customary rights issue, my own department's Heritage Legislative Working Group, including representatives from Jersey Heritage, who have been invaluable with their expert and professional knowledge and advice on the subject matter. For completeness in understanding how the draft law will work in practice, both the draft regulations, reward and archaeological licences are included in the report, as is the draft code of practice in an addendum. Sir, the meaning of heritage is very broad and covers the full range of our inherited traditions, monuments, objects and culture. It is the range of contemporary activities, meaning and behaviours that we draw understanding from. Heritage includes, but is much more than, preserving, excavating, displaying or restoring a collection of old things and objects. Meanwhile, antiquities can be described as objects from ancient history. Jersey, importantly, is a signatory to the 1992 Valletta Convention. The convention requires each party to institute a legal system for the protection of the archaeological heritage, including mandatory reporting, as stated in Article 2, to the competent authorities by a finder of the chance discovery of elements of the archaeological heritage. And Article 3, preservation of the archaeological heritage by applying procedures for the authorisation and supervision of excavation and other archaeological activities in a scientific manner, and to subject to specific prior authorisation the use of metal detectors and any other detection equipment or process for archaeological investigation only by qualified, specially authorised persons. While the Government of Jersey has made some progress in respect of its Valletta obligations, namely reporting, a voluntary scheme is currently in place, excavation, which is currently regulated in the sites of scientific interest, the historic environment record, while currently not statutory, it is included in the draft law, and by way of comparison, it has recently become embedded in England and Wales. There is currently no robust legislation in place for the protection and management of finds of national archaeological and historical significance to Jersey, which is something that I think as we stand here today, we need to reflect upon, and something which I find surprising, given how much I know this Assembly values the island's heritage. The need for heritage legislation in Jersey has been recognised since the late 1990s in response to the adoption of the Treasure Act and Portable Antiquities Scheme in England and Wales in 1996. The then Her Majesty's Solicitor General, His Majesty's Solicitor General, in 1999, in her article Treasure Trove, Lost, Stolen or Strayed in the Jersey Law Review, commented that few would argue that the existing law provides adequate protection for artefacts of archaeological or other significance. However, it is only in recent years, with the finding of the Le Catillon coin hoard II and the lack of a legal framework on how to manage the find, that there has been a real desire to bring forward comprehensive legislation in order to prevent history repeating itself. In the summer of 2022, following the settlement of the Le Catillon coin hoard II, I instructed the Law Drafting Office to begin drafting new heritage legislation. A government legislative working group was established by my department with representatives from other areas of government, law officers and representatives from Jersey Heritage. The process began with a symposium with a number of leading academics and professionals involved in portable antiquities across the British Isles and chaired by Historic England. This initial gathering allowed the working group to hear about what has worked well within the islands, within its existing legislation, and what further opportunities Jersey should consider in the development of its own heritage legislation. The draft law provides a suite of provisions to complement both the heritage strategy, as well as assisting Jersey in its effective and timely implementation of a number of relevant international conventions relating to heritage and antiquities, and to provide for a platform for implementation of potential future conventions. Sir, the draft law aims to close critical gaps by protecting irreplaceable heritage. Without a clear legal framework, archaeological objects and associated information are vulnerable to damage, dispersal or private sale, undermining Jersey's cultural legacy, while valuable information from non-designated archaeological sites may be destroyed. And it is sad, sir, that Jersey's history is littered with the dispersal of its heritage through private sale, destruction and other means. It will also close legal gaps, the existing reliance on unwritten conventions provides no statutory obligation for reporting fines, creating uncertainty for finders, landowners and authorities. It helps meet international obligations, as we are signatory, as I've mentioned, to several treaties and conventions that require robust heritage protection, which this draft law seeks to deliver. It promotes transparency and fairness. The draft law introduces clear processes for reporting ownership and rewards, balancing the interests of finders, landowners and the public. It supports research and education by creating a historic environment record, ensuring finds are preserved in public collections. The draft law will help safeguard knowledge for scientific study and public benefit. And importantly, it will prevent future disputes. The draft law will also provide a statutory framework to reduce ambiguity and potential future legal disputes over ownership and the handling of significant fines. The draft law, sir, proposes to introduce a fair reward system for finders and landowners, while ensuring that objects of national significance remain accessible for public benefit. As I intimated earlier, the purpose of the draft law is as follows. It is simple: to provide for the securing of Jersey's archaeological heritage, the reporting, recording and preservation of objects of archaeological and historical significance to Jersey and for connected purposes. The proposed draft law is separated into 6 defining parts. Part 1 includes interpretation, the definition of an archaeological object, defining a Jersey national antiquity based on the Waverley criteria, which are a well-established and recognised set of rules developed during the 1950s to control the export of important cultural property deemed national treasures from the UK, and embedding and defining customary law on treasure trove. Part 2 focuses on the reporting of archaeological objects, by when and to whom, offences relating to reporting of archaeological objects, exceptions to that reporting, the protection of archaeological objects, and offences relating to the protection of archaeological objects. Part 3 relates to treasure trove and Jersey national antiquities, the rewards and the code of practice. Initial assessment of whether a find meets the archaeological object criteria will be undertaken by Jersey Heritage's Fines Liaison Officer. If it is deemed that the object may be a Jersey national antiquity or treasure trove, the Viscount will be notified. In the case where it may be treasure trove, the Receiver General must be informed. The Viscount, in his independence and based on the facts laid before him, will make a determination as to an object either being a Jersey national antiquity and or treasure trove. The draft law makes provision for a reward. Those objects considered as Jersey national antiquities and those determined as treasure trove will be treated slightly differently in the process. With the latter, the Minister must consult the Receiver General for their views. I'm really pleased to say that the UK Treasure Valuation Committee, the TVC, has agreed to oversee the valuation of objects and make recommendations. The TVC already does this for England and Wales, as well as the Isle of Man. I'm pleased to say that I'm currently in advanced talks with the TVC and will hopefully be signing off on an MOU shortly. Importantly, the reward paid for any of these objects should not exceed the value the Jersey national antiquity would fetch on the open market. Further, a reward must not be paid in respect of human remains. To assist finders in understanding how the whole process will work, from identifying an object through to potential reward, a code of practice will be prepared and published. As suggested earlier, a draft code of practice has been developed, and members can see that as part of the report. Part 4 of the law relates to the statutory historic environment record and the information that will be recorded and maintained relating to archaeological objects. Part 5 relates to the states having regulatory powers to comply with future international obligations and standards, to protect Jersey's heritage and the licensing of archaeological excavations. And finally, Part 6, whose provisions relate to the relationship with customary law, limitation of civil liability, offences by bodies corporate, and regulations. As a consequence of this draft law, amendments will be, if it is adopted, amendments will be required to the Planning and Building Jersey Law 2002 and also the Shipping Jersey Law 2002. Sir, subject to support, this draft law will come into force by ministerial order and the draft regulations and draft code of practice will be lodged simultaneously. The draft regulations would then be voted on by the next Assembly. Sir, it is a sad truth that we will never know how much of this island's incredible heritage has been lost over the years. But this law will ensure that going forward, our heritage will be known, understood, and recorded at the very least. In relevant exemplar cases, it will also ensure that our heritage is protected through public rather than private ownership, which is entirely appropriate, even if it is too late for countless items that have already disappeared in the past. Sir, I do hope that members will support this proposition. And I always forget the words at this point, sir, but I propose, the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir, and I felt that I really should speak. For many islanders, heritage is something that's admired from a distance, seen in museums, in our landscape, or in the stories we tell our children. And that was the case for my family until 2012, until heritage arrived quite literally under our feet. As many members of this assembly will know, my husband is a metal detectorist, and he was one of those who uncovered the Le Catillon II hoard. And I watched up close the excitement of that discovery, the sense of wonder, the pride, the feeling that something extraordinary had been entrusted to ordinary people. And from the outset, the finders did the right thing and declared the find to the Crown immediately, and a supervised archaeological excavation followed. But I also witnessed the uncertainty, the strain, and the long, difficult process that followed. A process shaped not by clear law, but by customary expectations, informal understandings, mistakes, and gaps that no one had ever intended to leave unfilled. Sir, you will remember the process very well, as it spanned your entire career in the Law Officers Department. And it took 10 long years to sort out, during which time the landowner sadly passed away. And that experience has stayed with me. It has shaped how I think about heritage, about fairness, and about the responsibilities that we all share when something of significance is found. And it's precisely because of that experience, not in spite of it, that I support this draft law. It's clear to me that the draft law isn't about diminishing the role of finders or landowners. It's not about rewriting the past, but it's about learning from it. And it's about ensuring that no future finder, whether a detectorist, a farmer, a builder, or a child on the beach, has to navigate the kind of years of uncertainty that my family lived through. So I think the draft law protects heritage whilst respecting the people who discover it. The Le Catillon II hoard showed us the extraordinary richness of Jersey's past, but it also exposed the fragility of the systems meant to protect it. And when the draft law is unclear, no one benefits. Not the finder, not the draft law, sorry, when existing law is unclear, no one benefits. Not the finder, not the landowner, not the public, and not the heritage professionals who are simply trying to do their job. So this draft law replaces ambiguity with clarity. It sets out clearly what must be reported, when, and to whom, and it ensures that significant finds are preserved for the island, while also ensuring that those who discover them are treated fairly and consistently. It's a framework that respects both the object and the people that find it. Importantly, it creates a fair, transparent reward system. Detectorists are usually motivated by curiosity, community, and a love for history, but they also deserve some certainty, and my family knows what that feels like when that certainty is missing. This draft law introduces a statutory reward mechanism, clear, transparent, and it replicates tried and tested systems in other jurisdictions. It simply removes the guesswork. It removes the risk of disputes, and more importantly, it ensures that responsible behaviour is promoted, recognised, and not penalised. It strengthens Jersey's ability to manage its heritage responsibly, And I'm pleased to see that the draft law establishes the statutory historic environment record in law, and that it introduces licensing for intrusive archaeological work and aligns Jersey with international standards such as the Valletta Convention. And these are not abstract administrative reforms. They are without doubt the foundation of good stewardship. They ensure that our heritage is recorded, understood and managed in a way that supports education, research, planning and responsible development. So, Le Catillon 2 discovery could be described as a once-in-a-lifetime moment. But the lessons it taught us should not be once in a lifetime. We owe it to future finders and to future generations to ensure that our laws are clear, fair and fit for purpose. And I feel this draft law does exactly that. It provides certainty where there was uncertainty, it provides fairness where there was inconsistency, and it provides stewardship where previously we relied on convention and informal rules. So supporting this draft law is not about choosing between the finders and heritage professionals or between private rights and public interest. It's about recognising that all of those things matter and that a modern, transparent legal framework is the best way to honour them. My family's experience has taught me that heritage is not just about objects, it's about people. Those who discover our past, those who protect it, and those who will inherit it. And I think the draft law respects all of them. So just in closing, sir, I would have one question for the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, and that is, I wonder if he could expand on the role of the Treasure Valuation Committee and tell us about the stage that they have got to within the Memorandum of Understanding, because it is certainly my experience that the experience that these finders had with the Treasure Valuation Committee was not a positive one. And as I'm sure, sir, you will remember, recommendations were made by the Law Officers Department to challenge the valuation by the Treasure Valuation Committee. So I wonder if the Minister could just really make some comments about that. That is all I have to say, but I consider, as the former secretary of the Jersey Metal Detecting Society, be that a long, long time ago, and certainly I have spoken to many metal detectorists, as I know the Minister has consulted widely. It is a fair, balanced, proportionate and long overdue piece of legislation, and I shall be supporting the draft law. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Miles. The next member I have to speak on the principles is the Constable of St Brevard.
Thank you, sir. Two small unrelated questions for the Minister. The first is to ask if he's aware what the status of the Mont de la Ville dolmen is, which I'm aware a former governor took off to the UK and still remains on an estate over there. And the second question is, what is the status of the former Newgate prison facade, which languishes in the field in the island somewhere? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next member I have to speak is the Constable of St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Deputy Miles has just mentioned 90% of what I was going to say. I was unaware of Deputy Miles' involvement with detectorists and her husband's involvement. My question basically was, where does finding a few coins and buttons end and treasure trove begin? Because behind St Saviour's Parish Hall, there is a field owned by the parish, and my hope and desire is to build a small car park and a children's play park there. And I was approached by an amateur detectorist who said, "Oh, Constable, would you mind if I did a sweep of the field?" And I said, "Well, if you find another gold hoard, that would solve a lot of problems for us." And he did actually come back after 2 days with 2 sixpences and a threepenny bit. And if members ask what's that, I will be very depressed. But it's but nothing of value was found. But basically, it's a question to the Minister: where does finding a few coins end and treasure trove begin? Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Constable. The next member I have to speak on the principles is Deputy
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start by congratulating the Minister on bringing this law. It has been, as he's alluded, a long road, and it has caused me to reflect on what you might call the small island paradox, which is that we often speak encouragingly about our ability to make our own laws, to devise our own specific laws to suit our own specific circumstances, and because of our unique constitutional position, and indeed that is one of our greatest gifts, if you like. But the other side of that, the paradox, if you like, is I think we have limited resources to achieve that goal. That's the other consequence of being small. And I think this legislation, which I know has been worked on for some time, is perhaps a reflection of that. So there is a formal reasons for supporting this law, which the Minister has outlined, to do with providing a proper legal framework for archaeological investigation, to meet our international obligations, close legal loopholes, and prevent future disputes, and so on. But I think, for me, the bigger issue is that this law recognises the social and economic value of our heritage assets and gives them greater protection. And that, to me, feels incredibly important. I think Jersey's competitive advantage is pretty well entirely built on our difference, and I've alluded to the legal framework that we have, which has allowed us to in many ways, build our economic prosperity. But our economy is also built on a wider understanding of our unique identity. People come here to live and as tourists because of our heritage, which is understood, I think, in the wider sense. It's also what makes life in Jersey special. It's a package which also includes our geological heritage, which has shaped the cliffs and bays, the valleys and promontories, our natural heritage in terms of flora and fauna. And critically, it includes our archaeological heritage, which allows us to reconstruct our unique story deep into our past. I think unravelling our distant past is a fundamental part of establishing and adding to our unique island story. And in doing so, by the way, we express our profound respect for the lives of those that came before us. One day, all that will be left of our own lives will be called archaeology. Sadly, I suspect our archaeological footprint will be somewhat easier to detect than our ancestors, and whether future generations give it as much value as we give to archaeological remains remains to be seen. But it is worth acknowledging we have, as the Minister has, a world-class archaeological heritage. The Le Catillon II hoard, of course, is utterly extraordinary. And I think for many reasons, but not least because it gives us such a tantalizing glimpse into the lives of people living through a turbulent period in the island's past. But we also have the astonishing site at La Cotte in my own parish. I have early memories of attending digs at La Cotte with my father, and it has been a pleasure to pick up the threads of that early association with the team led by Dr. Matt Pope, who have continued investigating that and other prehistoric sites in the island. I think to truly understand the significance of La Cotte, you have to put it in a bit of context. It was inhabited by Neanderthals, distant human ancestors, or close human ancestors, I should say. They inhabited that site intermittently over about 200,000 years. Came and went as the ice ages waxed and waned. Even though there were gaps of tens of thousands of years between their occupation, remarkably, they kept coming back to the same place. It's an extraordinary thought. Human civilization is generally thought to be about 10,000 years old, but the Neanderthals came and went over a 200,000 year period to that one place. And I think in coming back to that place, they couldn't have done it from memory. They'd been away for thousands of years. It was because La Cotte was such a uniquely suitable site. It was the obvious place when you arrived back in this area. It was special then, and I would say still special today, albeit in different ways. So the point I want to make is that we actually live walk amongst an extraordinarily rich archaeological heritage. When we walk on the sand dunes, we are walking in a prehistoric landscape just underneath the surface. There have been many digs. There are many archaeological remains there. In the north coast, at Grone, near Grone, we have another Neanderthal site, less well known and less extensive, but nevertheless there. And of course, beneath the fields and buildings of the island, we have archaeological remains. And we will need to work hard to protect those assets. This law is a good start, an essential start, but I think there is more to do. The law focuses us on what has not been discovered yet. Many construction projects are in sensitive archaeological areas, and we need to ensure that sites are investigated for archaeological remains. I want to absolutely emphasize that doesn't mean that development can't go ahead. It just means that we investigate and understand our archaeology before development occurs. Protecting our archaeological heritage should not be seen as a regulatory barrier. It is an investment in the one thing that gives us something in the world, a unique story that differentiates us in a world that is in many ways becoming more homogenized and more standardized. So I welcome this legislation wholeheartedly and commend the Minister for bringing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Renouf. The next member I have to speak is Deputy Tadier, followed by Deputy Balash.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if you'd caught my light. So we seem to be sport for choice when it comes to St Brelard representatives speaking on heritage matters. We may get a full house today, depending on what Deputy Scott wishes to do. So I rise in my capacity as chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, to whom this proposition falls ordinarily. And we were pleased to have briefings on this and to get our heads around the law, a law which has been very much years in the making, as the Minister and other speakers have said so, which you yourself also know about. So I'm going to focus my comments primarily on the comments we've produced around customary law and treasure trove, because I think much of the rest of the law, I think, is completely uncontentious. And I'm not saying that this area is inherently contentious, but I think there are perhaps some considerations about ways in which treasure trove has been treated elsewhere, because there have been revisions of the law in other customary law jurisdictions, but not necessarily including Scotland. So there are different approaches which have been taken, sir, and these were some of the questions which our panel rightly asked about why certain decisions were made or not. So I'm just going to read some of the comments. The panel sought clarification regarding which elements of customary law remain with the draft law and the reasons for their retention. The Minister advised that the only customary provisions preserved in the draft law is the Crown's long-established right of treasure trove. So there are really three main elements that need to be satisfied still, both which reflect the customary law position, that treasure trove is defined as, firstly, an object of more than 50% gold or silver, that it has to be deliberately hidden, and that it has to be with the intention of later recovery and with no identifiable owners or heirs. So potentially 4 different aspects there, depending on whether you separate something has to be deliberately hidden with the intention of later recovery. I think a question that may need to be asked by the Minister in the summing up is actually whether or not any of those elements provide difficulty for clarification in terms of proof, I suppose. So how does one prove if something's been buried hundreds of years ago that it was actually buried? You can tell it's been buried, but you don't know what the intention of the burial was for, whether it was just to keep it hidden forever, or whether it was intended to be recovered later. And presumably, when it says for recovery later, it means by the same person or somebody related to that person, rather than just some unknown person in the future. So I think that there are potentially still problems with the definition of this part, sir. And the question we asked really which was part of our thinking, was the fact that treasure trove definitions as part of customary law really come from a medieval period. So they came from a time where I believe the custom was influenced by Germanic law, which said that, and it grew up, that anything that was found of value in this particular definition, if it's more than 50% gold or silver, it reverts to the crown. And of course that comes from a time when the crown needed to raise money for itself because it was engaging with many wars around Europe, for example. And the crown was, of course, around before there were elected governments to do those things. So I think there is a fundamental question that at least needs to be raised here about why in the 21st century, if somebody finds something that's made of gold or silver and it happens to be more than 2 objects in their back garden or indeed a field, why the crown should have an automatic right to that, because that's certainly not the Latin system. Latin basically operated a system of finders keepers. So if you find it on your law, you keep it. Why should somebody in the 21st century have to give something to the crown? So those are probably more personal comments than necessarily panel comments, but that was certainly a thought process which the panel did also go through. And when we put the question to the officers in charge, it was, the answer came back, and I can probably read it if I, is that, or rather I'll summarise it, is that they did consider doing away with that part of customary law, but I think it would have been a long drawn-out process, and it was seen to be much easier to reflect the current situation into this legislation. I think it is worth noting at this point that when the UK Parliament changed their law back in the 90s, that the definition, although treasure trove was kept as a subsection, the treasure trove was redefined as just treasure, and so they had their Treasure Act. And certainly when it came to single precious metal artefacts that were not coins, it was recognised that an object that is not a coin, that is more than 300 years old when found, and that has metallic content which is at least 10% by weight, precious metal, gold or silver, that's a treasure. And I think part of that recognises the fact that over a longer period of time, and of course as metallurgy got more sophisticated, I look at Deputy Southern here, who I recall did study both metallurgy and French as a young man, which is partly why his French is so rusty now. Been waiting quite a long time to get that one in, sir. I can write other jokes for anyone at a small cost. That's, as metallurgy has developed over the centuries, of course, it's been partly able to use other metals to achieve that, but also because the value of that has become perhaps more scarce. And we've seen that also in coins, though this doesn't relate to coins. The amount of silver and gold that's being used in coins over time has reduced. And so I would question whether or not it's actually wise to keep the percentages at 50% silver and gold, given the fact that more modern coins in recent years will have much less content in there. There's also a more fundamental question as to why it's just limited to silver and gold, isn't there? So if one were to find something made out of platinum in a field that had been deliberately buried with the intention of recovery later, why wouldn't that revert to the crown? If it's something that was only 40% silver, 40% gold, but was encrusted with rubies and diamonds, why would that not be considered treasure trove? Because the crown might be interested in having that reverting to him as well. Obviously, these things are not personal. We're talking about the crown as a concept here, and I get all that as well. So I think there are some very interesting questions which perhaps if the scrutiny panel had been more minded to over a longer period of time, were we not at the end of a session, sir, where there's a heavy load of legislation, we might have been able to perhaps analyse some of these questions in a bit more depth, sir. The long and the short of it is, though, I think what we have before us is, I think, a functioning a draft law, which I think will meet many of the requirements that are necessary so that we don't find ourselves in situations, again, where there are complex wranglings when a find has been made. And I think the important thing, which I haven't referred to focus very much on treasure trove here, is that there are, of course, other historical objects which don't fit into these categories, into this very narrow category, which will, of course, be of great public interest, which might want to be retained by Jersey Heritage or indeed other organisations in the island. And it's important that we have a framework by which this can be done expediently, but also with a high level of transparency, sir. So notwithstanding those earlier comments, which I think it was right to make, the panel, including myself, is happy to support what's being proposed here today.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Balash.
Sir, I'm very pleased to follow Deputy Tadier because if I do have any concerns about this law, they do centre upon the concept of treasure trove. But perhaps I could say, first of all, that I completely support the Minister's proposition, and I'm going to vote for it. So he should not be concerned in that respect. It's a really important piece of legislation which is long overdue, and I'm delighted that it has come forward to the Assembly. It's important because our heritage is so important to the island, and because our heritage should stay in the island. There was a time, I think in the interwar years, when quite important archaeological finds were uncovered in Jersey and ended up in an English museum. And that seems to me to be completely wrong. Our heritage belongs here. It belongs to us. And I do have a slight regret at the elliptical way in which treasure trove has been dealt with in the law. Article 11 of the law states absolutely clearly that a Jersey national antiquity belongs to the public of the island. First class, that's exactly as it should be. If a Jersey national antiquity, however, is treasure trove, we get into a rather circular argument as to who is the owner. And what Article 12.1 says is that if a Jersey national antiquity is treasure trove, it is held by the minister in trust for the Crown. What does that mean? It seems to me it must mean that it's held for the Crown in right of Jersey. And it's another way of saying that it belongs to the public of the island. But my regret is that the law couldn't actually say so. It may be that His Majesty's Receiver General might have taken an objection to that on traditional grounds, but if so, with due respect to the Receiver General, it's an objection that should have been overruled. Tradition is fine, but sometimes it must give way to modernity. And since the Act was passed, I think in 1947, which, as it were, repatriated the Crown's assets to Jersey. The assets of the Crown in Jersey are assets of Jersey. I will conclude by saying that I think there was a simple solution to this, and Deputy Tadier almost got there. But I think treasure trove should be abolished. And if treasure trove were abolished, then the only question that would be left is whether it is a Jersey national antiquity. That's the crucial question. It's a shame that we couldn't get there in one leap in this law. But nonetheless, by a circuitous route, I think we do get there. And for that reason, I'm very happy to support the law.
Thank you, Deputy. We're approaching the point in standing orders where I'm required to ask the Assembly about the adjournment for lunch. Are members...
Any other members due to speak, sir?
Sorry, I've got no one else to speak.
Sorry,
I propose the Minister sums up, sir.
Sir.
Minister, you content to reply and sum up?
Sir, sorry, I've got one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's just a very small point, really. Thank you. It was really about pushing the law further. That's really all it was about. And that was about extending to encompass Jersey's wider historic environment, protecting not just what is found, but the landscape and context from which finds emerge. Other jurisdictions protect archaeological areas as well as artifacts, as point one. Second one, the law could provide stronger enforcement tools. At present, the draft establishes obligations, but without substantial penalties for failing to report fines or for unlicensed excavation. Without real enforcement, compliance risks becoming optional. And finally, the island's maritime and underwater heritage remains largely unaddressed. Jersey's coastline and waters hold centuries of wrecks, submerged sites and artifacts at risk of damage or illicit removal. Truly comprehensive heritage regime must extend beyond the shoreline. Those are the points I'd like to make.
Thank you, Deputy Wall. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If not, I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I thank everyone for a fascinating, short but really fascinating debate. And I'm delighted that everyone spoke in support of the law. I will start by addressing, so they're all relatively technical. I'll actually start with the Connétable of St Brelade. I can't give you an answer. I cannot give the Connétable an answer, sir, I'm afraid, about Hauteville or Newgate Prison, the stone from there. But I can work with Jersey Heritage to try to get an answer for the Connétable. To the Constable of St Saviour, and Deputy Tadier referred to this in his speech, as did Deputy Balash. The law creates three categories of object: archaeological object, Jersey national antiquity, and treasure trove. And they are defined quite clearly, as Deputy Tadier referred to. So most objects would be, at the very least, Jersey national antiquities. But if they are at least 300 years old, then they become archaeological objects as well. However, if they, as Deputy Tadier said, if they are more than two objects and made up of more than 50% gold or silver and were deliberately hidden on the land all those years ago, and where the heirs are unknown, they become treasure trove. And so we have quite clearly defined the three different types of objects. So I think the law works quite well in that respect. Moving from a Deputy Miles's perspective, indeed, with regard to the MOU with the Treasure Evaluation Committee in the UK, a finder who is unhappy will be able to appeal either to the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development or can ask another minister to review the process that the valuation went through. This would be detailed in the regulations coming forward in the next term. Of course, the Treasure Evaluation Committee's recommendation is based on independent and professional experts, and the individuals themselves will be able to submit their own valuations to the TBC, who will consider them alongside those experts. So there is a method for dealing with issues. Right, trying to make sense of the customary law is one of the reasons why we have a definition of treasure trove which is so unusual and specific. The more than 50% silver and gold, it must have been hidden in the past, not just dropped, things which are very difficult in themselves, and there is great subjectivity. This is principally because we have tried to take customary law definitions and bring them into statute in that respect. What I would say to both Deputy Balash and Deputy Tadier, and indeed myself, is that were we to have a lower definition, as the treasure threshold in the UK is 10% gold or silver or precious metal, if we were to widen the definition from 51+% to 10%, it would actually mean that more objects end up being the property of the Crown. And indeed, I have enormous sympathy with the perspective that Deputy Balash and Deputy Tadier put forward with regard to the Crown's right. And in full disclosure, that was the road I set off down, the path that I set off on. And but it was very clear that that would have been process that would have taken many, many years. Ultimately, asking the Crown to give up its right would have been a very long process. And I do think, and it may be elliptical, but I do think the solution we have found in that respect is an appropriate one. So yes, the Crown still has that right. It is the Crown's property, but the Minister will look after that right in trust on behalf of the people of Jersey and the Crown effectively. So the practical result, I believe, is the same. But I think for the sake of getting this much needed law through, it was right that we maintained the Crown's right in that respect. Deputy Wall, thank you. There are references to underwater wrecks are mentioned, and also objects found in the shoreline. And so the law does deal to some extent, but I have no doubt, because we are learning more and more about Jersey's archaeological heritage in the marine environment, and it is much greater than many of us realise. Deputy Renner, I thank him for his comments. La Cotte is an incredible site, and indeed the King himself dug there as well many, many years ago when he was a young Prince of Wales. And when I speak to any visitors to the island about Jersey's heritage, it starts 250,000 years ago at the very least, which is incredible and something we must not lose sight of. So, also with regard to lost treasures, just as an example of something that's been lost, and Deputy Balash, I don't know if he knew about this particular instance, but it's one which, before 1947, objects that were found as treasure trove, or particular objects, were sent off island to the UK, to a UK museum, and the UK government then took them into its ownership and disposed of them as they wished. And indeed, a jadeite axe that was found in Jersey, which I believe now sits in our museum, but that was actually sold by the UK government, I understand, for £7,500, and ultimately into private ownership, and ultimately got bought back by Jersey Heritage, I think in the 1990s or early 2000s, for £15,000. And so, it is astonishing how easily we lost our heritage. Indeed, Dolmen du Mont de la Ville is sitting in a celebrity's back garden in the UK. Across the board, we have lost our heritage. The Dolmen of Faldouet used to be a tourist attraction, and so what you see is a Dolmen of Faldouet, which is an amazing dolmen. But if you look at the kind of entrance area, that was all built by a Victorian who fancied drumming up some tourist trade, which in itself becomes archaeological, I guess, or historical. But with that, and not wanting to hold anyone back from lunch, I propose the appel, sir, in this case. Thank you, sir.
The appel has been called for, so I invite members to return to their seats, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the principles have been adopted. 46 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. Deputy Tadeo, does the panel wish to scrutinise the draft law?
No, thank you, sir.
With that concluded, are members to content to adjourn?
Yes, sir.
Yes. The state stands adjourned till 2:15.